our work session than our formal business, but there'll be an opportunity for public comment after each one of these items. So before we jump into item number 1, which will be presented by John Felton, our County Health Officer, I'll just ask our City Administrator, Chris, if there's anything that you want to raise before we jump into item number 1.
Just want to give a reminder that this Thursday, so that's December 9th, we're going to be doing orientation for the 4 new council members, but any of you are welcome to attend. We just would appreciate you letting us know so we can be prepared. But Dan Clark from the Local Government Center, and then a gal by the name of Renee Lemon, and I haven't met Renee, but Renee works for the state of Montana. She's going to be covering land use. So it is, it really is back to the basics, but I think it's always a great refresher. If any of you can attend 1 to 5, we are going to use the new City Hall, 4th floor conference room that's been set up there. Please still park though here and walk over. But if you plan on attending and you haven't let Lynette know, please do that tonight, even with an email, or let me know so that we can be prepared. Because we've got not only the 4 newly elected officials, hopefully we've got some of you, and actually we have a couple of other boards who've asked if they could participate, and we've said, sure, why not? So just a reminder, that is this Thursday from 1 to 5 in the afternoon.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on then to item number 1, COVID-19 update by our Unified Incident Command, which in this case is the face of John Felton, our County Health Officer. John, welcome. And what can you tell us about the state of COVID-19 in our community?
Thank you, Mayor. It's good to be back. I'll cut right to the chase. Things are actually looking better after several months of telling you it's getting worse and worse. I can say it's better. I do need to have screen sharing turned on. Whoever is the host, we could give that to me.
We'll work on that.
There we go. Okay, do you see that slide?
We do.
Okay, thank you. So let's start as we usually do nationally. The country has worked its way from almost all red into some more yellows and oranges. Montana, which at one point spent a long time up on the top 2 or 3 or 4, is now 31st in the nation this is as of the Sunday report from the Harvard Brown School of Public Health. You can see we're getting dangerously close to 800,000 deaths in the United States that relate to COVID-19. This is the Montana picture. I'd suggest you direct your attention to the 2 peaks. The peak of last year, the 2020 peak, happened in November. It was a fairly expeditious route up, a quick stop at the top, and a pretty quick route down. We saw about the same period of time an increase in this year, in the 2021 surge. Statewide, it didn't go as high. That's not true in Yellowstone County. But we also had this sort of about 4-week period of just sort of cresting at the top and then starting to work its way down. But clearly we're on the backside of the curve. As I've said many times, no epidemic lasts forever and then goes up forever. If we look at Yellowstone County, it's a similar but a little bit different picture. Our surge started about a month earlier this year than it did last year. It took the same 3 months to go up. But again, a little bit more sort of peak at the top here. But as you can see, over the last month or 6 weeks, we've really been working our way down pretty dramatically. When we look at the Yellowstone County experience compared to the Montana experience, you can see we haven't had quite as many cases as our population might indicate. Right now, we're sitting around 12 or 13% of the state cases on a 7-day average basis. This is where you can really see what the course of the pandemic over the last year or so. Here's last year's peak. We started going up in September, peaked in November. It took about 3 months to come down here to this baseline period of right around 15 or 16 cases a day from March through July. This year, our increase started about a month earlier, peaked in October, and then it started to work its way down. So as you can see, over the last 8 weeks or so, we've seen pretty significant reductions. And we're getting close to that yellow line of being below 25 per 100,000 per day. Again, as a reminder, 25 per 100,000 per day in Yellowstone County is about 40 cases a day, and that 10 per 100,000 per day is about 16 cases a day. But they do look remarkably similar. We actually had a higher peak this year. I think that it's important to remember that there's differences in what happened in these 2 years. So if we go back here to the 2020 surge, there were no vaccines yet. The vaccines weren't available. We did have a lot of other mitigation measures in place. Governor Bullock had a statewide mask requirement in place. There were limitations on hours of occupancy, or hours of operation, occupancy levels, group and gathering size. Those were all limited. This year, none of those other mitigation measures are in place, but a proportion of the population is vaccinated, and certainly a higher proportion of the population has some degree of natural immunity from infection. So it really kind of looks like we just traded off mitigation measures over the course of the 2 surges. This one shows really clearly that the 2021 surge was higher. At our peak in October, we had about 300 cases more than our peak in November of last year. But the picture really looks similar. You just follow the increase over 3 months. Here's the same 3-month increase. Last year, it took us 3 full months to come down. So now we're into the 2nd month of that decline. But when you look at the slopes of these curves, they look really similar. So it is pretty dramatically similar. The other thing I'd mention is that there was no Delta variant back here. This was all what's called the wild case, or the original SARS-CoV-2 virus. This was almost exclusively Delta in our 2021 surge. The other good sign is our test positivity coming down. We have moved that into the yellow category, having been 2 weeks below 10%. Again, bear in mind that this is all testing done in Yellowstone County, so it includes people who are symptomatic and get tested. It includes people who are asymptomatic but are getting ready for hospital procedures. It also includes surveillance testing, particularly in long-term care. When we were back at this level here, we were running about a 30-ish% positivity rate among symptomatic folks. That is also working its way down. We're also seeing good recovery in the hospitalization rates. So this looks at the number of COVID-19 patients in our 2 hospitals. Again, the 2 peaks look very, very similar. We didn't actually go quite as high this year as we did last year. So maybe that's some effect of vaccination. I would also note this period here. Remember, this is where we were down around 15 or 16 cases a day, what appears to be our baseline. But even at that, bear in mind that 16 cases a day is about 5,000 cases a year. So it's still 5 times the rate of influenza on an annual basis. But also we had 15 to 20 patients in the hospital, even at that baseline level. So it's not going to be like we're going to get away from this. But I think this was a very positive sign. The last time we were below 60 patients in our hospital, you have to go all the way back to August of last year. So it's taken us, or August of this year, so it's taken 4 months to get there. On a monthly basis, again, you can compare the surges with respect to the hospital census. We didn't get quite the hospital census in 2021 as we did in our 2020 surge. But we are seeing a higher rate of patients in the ICU. So this is certainly a concern. Right now, more than 40% of our patients through the first few days of December, more than 40% of our hospitalized patients are in the intensive care unit. So it's a really serious disease. Most of the patients remain Yellowstone County residents. That's when we had our previous surges, we saw that come down a little bit, but throughout this surge, it's mostly been Yellowstone County. When we look at kids, we are seeing this kind of working our way back down from this early peak of around 25%, which is common in Delta. We worked out to the last week, it was only about 13% of cases were kids 0 to 19. But we are getting kind of more back to where we were last year, which was that 12 to 15%. Since school's been in place in session this year, we're more in that 15 to 20%, so a little bit higher than what we saw last year. Continue to see, again, about 2/3 of our cases are in that population of working adults. This is looking at the variants, so you can go all the way back here for really 3 full months now. Essentially, all of the cases that have been subtyped are Delta cases. That raises the question of what does the Omicron variant mean to us? It's really too early to tell what Omicron is going to look like. But the very early indications are that it is highly transmissible. You've seen the dramatic increase in numbers, particularly in South Africa. But it also appears to be causing relatively mild disease. So hopefully this will be here. There's no doubt about that. It'll be here, I would guess, in the next week or two. We'll start to see cases. But hopefully what we'll see is, even if it is more transmissible, it causes less severe disease. As we look at the effect of immunization and natural immunity, we're getting closer to that 70% of our population having some degree of immunity related to either vaccination, which is the green, or natural infection, which is the blue. During the surge, you can see this, that if you look at the rate of increase of the blue versus the rate of increase of the green, you can see that we really did have most of our increase over that period was not in people becoming fully vaccinated, but rather people who have had infection. We have now given in excess of 180,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccine in Yellowstone County, and we're getting very close to 80,000 of us who are fully vaccinated in the county. On a weekly basis, we're seeing a lot. We are still seeing that 3,000 to 4,000 doses per week. That continues to be a pretty high proportion of folks who are getting booster doses or third doses. We did do a clinic out at Cedar Hall this weekend. On Saturday, in 3 hours, we gave about 360 doses. About half of those were to kids, and about half were to adults. And we are continuing to see first doses. Remember, those third doses don't add to the number of people who are fully vaccinated. But you can see we're just adding right around 500 to 600 a week who are becoming fully vaccinated. This data is a week old because we get our information from the state on Tuesday. So as of November 26th, 51% of eligible Montanans, meaning 5 years of age and older, were fully vaccinated, and 50% of Yellowstone County residents 5 years of age and older. We're seeing a bit of an increase now in this younger group. We've got a really high proportion of the older folks, age 60 and up, are now have at least one dose of vaccine in them. So that population is getting pretty well protected. We continue to see deaths, among some of those older folks who have pretty significant underlying disease. When we look at this age cohorts, again, this is a week old. 7% of that 5 to 13 population is fully vaccinated. That's not a surprise, because remember, it takes 2 doses plus 2 weeks to get achieve fully vaccinated status. We are continuing to see little bits of increase, about 0 to 1% per week of people becoming fully vaccinated. Again, here's that 65 plus, 80% vaccinated. When you look at that working age population, so let's look at that 25 to 64, we're somewhere in that 50-ish plus or minus a little bit range percent of fully vaccinated working age adults. And then lastly, deaths due to COVID-19 or related to COVID-19. Again, a COVID-19 related death means that the physician who signed the death certificate either said that COVID-19 was the cause of death or a contributing factor to the death. We've now lost 461 Yellowstone County residents through today. We reported 3 more deaths today. Again, if you notice that here's our surge of last year, and here's our surge of this year, that we did have significantly more deaths this year than we have in the past. So this surge has been particularly difficult. in terms of a lot of folks in the ICU and a lot of folks succumbing to the disease. So the overall news, as I said, is good. We are clearly on the backside of this surge. We have a great unknown still with the Omicron. Again, it's too early to tell, but the very early indications, which are quite preliminary, suggest that it is highly transmissible, but perhaps is not causing severe disease. We'll really know more when we start getting cases of that vulnerable population, if that's how serious it is. So overall, we're going the right direction. Last year we didn't experience much of a surge after the holidays. We had a little bit of a bump, but not significant and not long lasting. So hopefully folks will be careful, and we'll see the same thing this year. So with that, Mayor, I'm happy to respond to any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, John. I'll start. I'm sure other council members will have some. I wonder if you can just comment a little bit about the average age of recent deaths. That group, I believe it was about 8 years younger on average in this most recent surge, but that number might be off a bit. And then if you can comment generally on the legislative changes, you're not going to be able to summarize that tonight, but what can we do to get a better handle on the new legislative world that we live in? Because I'm very fuzzy about what that is.
Okay. So first of all, yeah, we are seeing some younger deaths. I think that has to do with a couple things. One is I think the older population has recognized how vulnerable they are to COVID-19. They're a bit more careful. We have a very high vaccination rate among that population. And since in general people tend to hang around with folks who are kind of their own age cohort, that population is pretty well protected. That working age population is not as well protected and has been a bit more resistant to vaccination. We are continuing to see about 80 to 85% of our hospitalized patients are unvaccinated, and most of our deaths are unvaccinated, but the age is getting a bit younger. With respect to House Bill 121, which is the law that was passed in the 2021 legislature, what that really did is affect the authorities given to local boards of health and local health officers. I would note that it doesn't change any of the responsibilities of the local board of health or the local health officer, so we have those same expectations. What changed was the authority of those bodies and those individuals to act autonomously. So for certain things like the appointment of a health officer, or fees, or local rules, or local orders, or directives, all of those now need to be approved by what's called the local governing body. So in most public health departments in the state of Montana, they're county health departments, so that local governing body is the county. For those of us who work under interlocal agreements, then the parties to those interlocal agreements, which in our case, the key parties are City of Billings, the City of Laurel, and Yellowstone County, need to determine how they're going to do that. Now, it isn't required that the full bodies act. In other words, they need to be the whole city council or the whole county commission. The local jurisdictions can determine how they want to do that. So you can kind of think through what are the possibilities if the decision is that we're going to require the city councils and the county commission to act individually on each of these required approvals. Obviously, that takes some time because of the public notice requirements. Then you have to figure out what's required. Would all three of those need to come to the same decision in order for it to act? Do 2 out of the 3 act for the entire group? So all those sort of nuances and decision-making variables would need to be worked out. It is also possible, based on the way the law is written, that those 3 bodies could come up with an alternative. They could assign a group, one from each governing body, to however the groups want to do it, and charge that group with that authority. So it's not been really well determined how the city county health departments are going to manage this. I do think we need to figure out how we can move forward on this. To me, the biggest issue is as the state changes its local or its rules, we need to be able to change our local rules to comply with that. And we can't do that without a governing body to make those changes. So the risk is, in my mind, if we don't figure out what that governing body is, we could find ourselves in a situation that our local rules are incompatible with the state rules, and then we've opened a whole new kettle of fish. So it requires this governing body to act on certain things, not everything the health department does or everything the local board of health does. But for those things that are required, again, appointment of a health officer, rules, regulations, directives, and orders, or fees, those things need to be approved. I would say that the language of the law does include some language about it's intended to really affect a public health emergency, and it's not intended to change sort of the day-to-day public health. I'm not sure how you really execute that, because if it doesn't say, certain orders are subject to governing body approval and certain ones aren't. So the language of the law itself is pretty fuzzy. So I understand your uncertainty about it, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, John. Other questions from other council members? Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. John, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think I asked you early on as far as what your role would be as far as county health officer in giving recommendations to us as a local body. And I would like to hear if you feel that something needs to be, normally you would do as an order, if you give it to the county commissioners or give it to the local authorities as us, the governing body, to consider. I think you should consider doing that if you feel that it's in place. So I appreciate you looking into that, and hopefully if you feel there's something that we should be doing, that you would actually give that recommendation to us. I did have a question.
I'm certainly happy to offer my opinion, but it really is those bodies that will need to get together to make the decision. So hopefully we can get them all together.
I did have a question about the testing. I think in the Delta, you're only doing testing periodically, and that's kind of how you got your numbers. Are you testing for this new Omicron or any of the other type variants, or is this just kind of hit and miss?
Yeah, so we don't test for the variants locally. Those are done at the state public health lab, and yes, they do have the capacity to test for Omicron. One thing that we are being very diligent about is particularly patients who are hospitalized. We make sure that those samples get up to the state health department to determine which variant is involved with them. When other samples go to the state health department, if there's a sufficient size sample, meaning there's enough genetic material, then they are being subtyped. So it does happen at the state health lab, not here.
Thank you. Other questions for John? Are there any other questions for John? Don't see any. So John, thank you very much. Stay safe. We appreciate your efforts and your staff.
All right, thank you all.
Okay, that'll open us up for public comment on item number 1. If anybody would like to offer public comment, please come to the podium and tell us your name and address, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Is there any public comment on item number 1? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment period, move on to item number 2, our marijuana business license fees. Andy Zeller, the money man, is our presenter tonight.
Good. Well, all right. There's a big sign that says "Don't touch this microphone," so I hope that's loud enough. I'll try not to touch it again. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I really want to have kind of a dialogue with you guys. Obviously, it's a work session. We're going to go through kind of my thought process on developing a recommended license fee for marijuana businesses. I'm not all in, not married to this, so I really want your feedback to see if, 1, I'm going the right direction, or 2, you guys really think, well, you missed the mark and this is what we were hoping for. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go forward. So we're going to walk through some of my assumptions and just kind of explain how I ended up where I ended up, and then open it up for discussion. So my main objective here was to have the cost to regulate or enforce the marijuana ordinances that were passed come from the revenue from the business licenses. That was my general overall goal here. So to do that, we needed to estimate our total costs. Then I wanted to allocate it out to each business type, and then take a wild guess at how many businesses might be in those areas, spread that cost out over those, and then in the case of transportation, as we'll get there, there were some other circumstances that I kind of came into play there. So after talking with code enforcement, fire inspection, and then my staff, and our best estimate at this point is that total enforcement costs will be about $68,000. If there were a lottery, we're guessing we would need someone to administer that or oversee it, and that cost could be as high as $5,000. And then you see the FTE cost there, largely in code enforcement, where they would handle complaints on business segments. What you'll see when we get down to the next step is I'm not anticipating a huge number of businesses coming in the city because of the prohibition against retail sales. So I don't anticipate a large demand on my staff, and nor does fire anticipate a large demand on their staff due to the just the number of businesses that we're anticipating. So we took those costs, and then we said, all right, where are you going to spend your time? And the business license clerk, it's equally amongst each of them. Code enforcement, we said, probably in the dispensaries is where we thought you'd see most of your complaints. People aren't going to be complaining as much in manufacturing or at the testing labs. So, and then with fire inspection, we thought you'd likely see more inspection at the manufacturing level because there's likely more risk in that area than there is in dispensaries or cultivation. And then 100% of the lottery costs would only go to the dispensaries. So we allocate those costs out that way, and that's how we arrive at what's the overall number we're trying to capture through revenue from, let's see if I can do it. So if you go all the way across on dispensaries, we want to capture $33,000 to recoup all that cost. So the next thing I did is I went and tried to guess how many licenses. Because there's the cap of 8 dispensaries, that one was easy. It's not going to be more than 8. Will it get to 8? Obviously, nobody knows, but that one was the easiest one. The rest of them, I looked to other communities that already have legal recreational marijuana all around the country. There aren't a ton, and I tried to kind of find communities that are similar in that they're not a suburb of a large city. They have a similar population and have some distance to get to the next population center. So I looked at those communities there and what I could find publicly. Grand Rapids, Michigan. In Oregon, I can only get it by the county, but Bend, Oregon, Medford, Oregon, and then Alaska, Anchorage, and Fairbanks. And when I looked at that, to try to guess, okay, if you've got 8 dispensaries, how many manufacturing facilities, how many testing facilities, et cetera, would you need to service that? It's not a real scientific method here, but I just kind of had to come up with something, and that was my approach. So those were the total number of businesses I was anticipating applying for the city limits. With respect to transportation, there are 2 reasons why I'm going to recommend a $55 fee. The reasons are, 1, the lack of a physical location is it's impossible or incredibly challenging to enforce anything. We see this with like Uber Eats and DoorDash. They're operating out of their house, and then they pick something up at a restaurant, deliver to somebody else's house. There aren't code enforcement complaints. There's no sign out front. Their neighbors, unless they say something, their neighbors don't know that they're operating a home-based business. We just don't see the complaints there. So there's no real way to enforce any regulation. And then part of the marijuana regulation limits our ability to prohibit transportation on public roads if they're licensed by the state. So this, I think, was intended to keep red counties from limiting transportation through their county, but the interpretation does limit our ability to regulate their ability to transport on public roads. So my recommendation there is that if they're able to get the license from the state, then we would just issue them a regular business license for transport only. So my recommendation on all of these areas, the approach that I'd like to see, if we're consistent with kind of my methodology, is initial application fees. Well, first of all, the annual application fee for dispensary would be $4,140, cultivators $4,350, transporters $55, but I would recommend that stays with whatever the standard business license fee is. So in the future, if that goes up, this would as well. Manufacturing $4,750 and testing at $3,675. Part of that, I would recommend that the initial application fee be much smaller, because what we're going to see, or what I anticipate seeing, is in the case of medical dispensaries, maybe we get 15 applications, we're going to hold a lottery. They all get the same sort of review and scrutiny to, see, are you eligible to be in the lottery? There's going to be back and forth likely. Hey, you didn't have, you didn't fill this out completely, or you're missing that supplementary documentation, et cetera. That's what the 10% fee is going to, or the 10% is going to cover. In the case of everyone but dispensaries, once they're approved, they would come pay the other 90% and be on their way. And then each year, that would be your annual renewal. In the case of dispensaries, what I would recommend is we'd find those eligible applications. If there are more than 8 that intend to apply, then they would all pay that 10% fee to get into the lottery. Only those 8 that were successful would pay the full remaining 90%. So that's the end of the presentation, but I certainly don't expect that to be the end of discussion. And I realize those are some pretty hefty fees, pretty significant barriers to entry. There may be things to consider here that you guys feel, motivated that, we really don't want to see, testing facilities have such a high barrier to entry, or whatever that may be. But I guess my recommendation is it shouldn't be higher than those, because I think we have a challenge to argue that. But with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mayor, and answer any questions. Maybe one closing comment. I do have kind of a rough calculator that if you want to say, hey, what if we see 500 businesses come in, what will it do, et cetera, we can kind of play with some of that too. So.
Okay, thank you, Andy. One obvious question, I think, is your costs go to business licensure, fire inspection, code enforcement, and lottery costs. What about time and expense for the city administration, for legal department, city council, our time, law enforcement? Did I hear some other public works? Yeah, to the extent they're involved there, but it seems like there's some other departments. Can you discuss that?
So I guess with respect to like an admin overhead cost, I didn't include any of that because I can't tie a number directly to that. I think perhaps with the passage of time, when we realize, how many businesses are there really going to be, what is the true admin time spent, that may be a little easier to answer. But at this point in time, there is nothing in there for an overhead cost. If you'd like to see something in there for that, we can try to figure out what that might be. But with the case of setting the business license fee, my understanding is that we have to be able to tie it back to anticipated actual costs. So certainly overhead costs are a real cost, but I think trying to fund, increases in crime, increase in police calls off of license fees, I would recommend staying away from that, I guess. But and I'm not sure where Public Works would be involved in this, so maybe a little clarity there.
Okay, other questions? We can discuss. Councilmember Puritan and Councilmember Boyette.
You could do the other one because I'm not chimmed up.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, are you thinking of hiring one person or no people because you're going to spread this over? How many people?
So for my staff in the business license, I'm not anticipating the need to hire anybody outside of perhaps somebody to like a third-party contract to administer or oversee the lottery. Because, I mean, we're talking, an estimated, 10, 16, 18 businesses there. That's not that many compared to what we have on an annual basis. We're doing, I think, somewhere between 600 to 800 a month renewals or new licenses. So.
Okay, one more question, Mayor.
Please.
So let's say we find out at the end of the year that this is not enough money. Can we change the license fees the next year or the next year based on what we see?
Yeah, my thought would be we would come back probably within a year to, kind of readjust it based upon what we see. Code enforcement, I think we would be hiring somebody. Wyeth and I talked about, a half FTE. You can't spread that over people, but the thought there is if it doesn't, if it needs, if we need to increase it, we increase it. But if there isn't truly a need for a half FTE for this, that would become one of the code enforcement officers that we were envisioning with the mill levy. So there would be a way to absorb them without just laying somebody off, I guess.
Okay, Councilmember Puritan?
Thank you. So a couple of questions, Andy. One of them is in your, well, I'll do this one first. From those towns that you had up there, do they, what sort of fees are they charging? Is it very different than what you have up there?
So I didn't look at what their fees were, and honestly, because my objective was to say, what is that fee to cover the cost?
Okay.
I do know that I did look locally here. I've got there it is. I just made some notes, so forgive misspellings. But Bozeman, I just saw they set theirs at $750, but they're taking a very different approach than we are, and that's the case here in all of them. Helena, there's just $10, which is their current business license fee, but they are going to be taking specific business license fees for marijuana businesses to council soon. And then Missoula, I didn't hear back from.
Okay.
With respect to the state of Montana, you may have seen these. This is the annual fee for the cultivation license, and they are by tier. In my research, I did see some communities. Where did we end up on tiers? Did we go to 5 or 7?
5.
4 or 5?
Was it 4 or 5?
Okay. Well, I did see a similar process in other communities where they said, we can stagger it by the size. We certainly could look at that if you guys felt the need to do so. Again, there's just not a lot of businesses we'd be spreading it over. I think it's 2 or 3. The manufacturer licenses here, it's based upon pounds of manufacturing, but 5, 10, 20, these are the state license. Okay. These were proposed, so I should clarify that because I don't know if these became the adopted fees, but I know these were proposed a few weeks ago.
So one follow-up, Mr. Mayor. So one of the ones that you didn't have in there also was the police involvement. Mm-hmm. It's just code enforcement, because if there's issues, then police would be involved.
If there's criminal activity, certainly police would be involved.
But we're not going to assume that at this point.
I am not assuming any recovery of police costs here. And I think, again, that'd be really challenging to do. Certainly could see what, I wouldn't know where to begin with that, honestly. That'd be a tough one to do.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Trickey, Councilmember Shaw?
Are you contemplating doing this type of analysis for the standard business license?
I am not at this time, no. I certainly think our business licenses need review, but no, it's not on my short-term priority list.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't expect that, but it does occur to me that at least 2 of the things that are on there are probably just the standard costs that like the fire department or and whatnot would do, and the real increase would seem to be the belief that there's going to be a lot of calls to code enforcement.
Mm-hmm. guess go ahead.
I was just going to simply add, it kind of ties to an earlier question, I think, about FTEs. Right now, we really don't know. We're really speculating based on other things. But if you take our most recent action regarding massage businesses and the work that that's added, we'll see what this does or doesn't do. And if we start having a conversation, I can anticipate one about sober living facilities. All of a sudden, we're talking about a year ago, 18, 24 months ago, not a lot of demand on the finance staff, code enforcement, in each of these areas. But now in a relatively short period of time, we've added some significant expectations and responsibilities. And I think with that, we'll have to gauge that going forward. What are our costs? And do you, as the policy body, continue or direct us tonight that you want the fee to cover our cost, and whenever it does, us to bring that forward to the body? And as we either overestimate or underestimate these costs, that'll have a direct effect on whether the fees need to come back for recommendations to go up or down. And by doing it per resolution instead of ordinance, you and future councils will always have the ability to do that with the necessity to advertise it properly, hold the public meeting, and make the decision, which won't be a 60-day requirement window that you have in the ordinance. So you've got some authority there, and future councils will have authority to adjust a little bit more nimbly than we currently have. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Okay, so I have one quick question and then a comment or a point that I think I would like to put forward. So in this proposal, we would have medical dispensaries paying about $400 just to enter the lottery. Is that correct? Because that's 10%. I mean, roughly. Even if they're not successful, they would have to put that forward as like a down payment, sort of, or is that okay?
Yep, that's the recommendation. Again, I picked 10%. The state's taking a similar approach. I think theirs might be 20. They don't have a cap though, so if you're likely going to pay the full amount and succeed. I would, maybe 10% is too high. I would like to see something that's a fee to cover the application review, even if it's not a successful recipient, just because there is some admin costs there for sure. So if you desire that, hey, we think 10% is too high, and that very well could be, scale it back. But I think there should be some application fee there.
Well, that's sort of my question, is if I could get a little more information on that, not necessarily right at this second, but how expensive you're thinking it will be to process the application. If you think we can go lower, I would be curious to know how low can we go to still cover costs? Because obviously, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do that. But if there's wiggle room there, I guess I'd be curious to know what that would look like. If that makes sense. Okay, and then the second piece is that I'm really struggling with the allocation of the code enforcement person, this half-time position. I get the business licensure, I get the fire inspection, the dispensary lottery. I believe that we are going to have a demand on code enforcement. I'm not saying we won't, but where I'm really troubled is that 50% of that fee right now, which is about $25,000-ish, is going to be put onto 8 medical dispensaries that cannot sell recreational, whereas we're going to also have cultivation, transportation, manufacturing, and testing, which can all deal in the recreational market. So to me, I see this as kind of a way that we're going to end up pushing these costs down to medical patients without being able to balance it out on the recreational side. And for the other categories, no, they can't sell, recreational in the city, but they can grow it, they can manufacture it, they can test it. So to me, those businesses have access to a different pool of capital. I would like to see those numbers adjusted, because I personally believe that the barrier to entry for medical dispensaries, which again, it's just for medical patients, as we know, it's too high, in my opinion.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, I think it was Karen Tracy who did a lot of the work on the ordinance early on. Did she have any input into this at all?
I did share it with her a week and a half ago, and most of our discussion revolved around the transportation portion, really.
Okay, and the reason I brought that up is because I think, I thought I remember during the discussions and reading that transportations can actually store product as well. And so if you're saying that we're not going to license that, we won't know if they're storing the product in between of when they're delivering it from pickup to delivery. So I guess I think we're going to have, kind of like Councilman Shaw said, we're going to have more code enforcement as far as, making sure their facilities are stored or secured or whatever it is. So I think maybe we should need to spread that out, code enforcement along the lines a little bit more, but I also don't think we should be just leaving a $55 business tax to get them licensed. I think they need to go through the same licensure process. And again, we don't allow businesses and residents, so if we're going to make sure that they're storing the product, they're not storing it at their house, in their garage. These transporters are businesses, and they're specialized businesses. So I think we should be, they should go through the same licensure process. So I think we need to separate out and figure out how many are there going to be. I think there are going to be more than 2 transporters for sure. I also is talking to some of the people in the industry. I think we're going to have a lot more cultivators. They want to hook up to our water and sewer. And so they're going to want to move out of the county into the city, and we're going to see more cultivation in the city than we will out in the county, because it's much more difficult for them to cultivate in the county. The same thing with manufacturing. They're going to want to move it out of the county into the city and actually have those city services to manufacture. They're going to produce all their recreational products in the city, but they're going to have to sell them in the county.
Okay.
Okay, other questions for Andy? We'll have some questions, try to get some factual stuff out, and then we'll open up for public comment, kind of come back for a more general discussion about where we actually want to head. Councilmember Ewald?
Thank you, Mayor. On these transporters, Andy, if they're selling the stuff in the county, can the transporter transport it into the city to the destination?
For retail or
Yes.
medical?
So for either one.
My understanding is they cannot transport and deliver adult use recreational marijuana into the city because of the vote, the outcome of the vote, but they can transport medical to card holders. Beyond that, I'm going to defer to Gina, though, because I don't have a legal opinion otherwise.
Thanks, Andy. Actually, they are allowed to transport within the city of Billings. They can transport from one place to another. That's specifically provided for under the law. They can't, a transporter cannot deliver marijuana or marijuana products to a consumer unless that's a registered card holder. But a consumer, they cannot deliver to a consumer. They can deliver and transport to licensed premises and other marijuana businesses.
So, follow up.
Go ahead.
So, if I'm understanding you right, these transporters have nothing to do with supplying the customer. They can't, even for medical, if they can't get to the place to pick up their marijuana, their medical marijuana, the transporter can't do that.
Well, a transporter could deliver to a medical marijuana patient, a registered card holder, but they cannot deliver to an adult use consumer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. Andy, can you remind me, is this coming up for a vote next Monday?
I think it's on the December 20th.
On the 20th? Okay.
Because I was going to take input from today to make any modifications to that resolution.
Okay, all right, so it gives us a little bit of time. Okay.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Bernice?
I just want to voice my agreement with Councilwoman Shaw's on the application fee, I would call it. It's just a flat fee, whatever the cost of services would be to run the application, do the background checks, whatever we have to go through it, and just have a flat amount to apply for that. That way it covers the cost. 10% I think is going to be too high, unless our cost of service is $400.
Well, I think the dispensary, well, let me pose it this way. My thought with the dispensaries was that if you were going to apply for a license, you should bear a portion of the cost of the lottery, because we are incurring the lottery cost for the 10 applicants, whatever that may be, or 12. it shouldn't be just the successful 8 that pay the cost of the lottery. Now, maybe you think otherwise, and that's, let me know. But I think with the dispensary, if we do see more than 8 applicants and we have to hold a lottery, the application cost is high because we have to cover that lottery cost. Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess I would disagree or ask you why you think the ones who are not going to get the license need to bear the cost of the lottery.
My thought was, we're having the lottery due to the fact that they're applying for a license. They all are equally contributing to the 8+ number. So that would be the reasoning. But if you're thinking, no, really the successful ones should be the ones paying for it, that'd be fine too.
Okay.
It's kind of like when you buy a scratch-off ticket at the holiday, you got to pay to play, I guess. So, but the odds you're actually winning aren't too good in that case. Councilmember Brown and Councilmember Bertricki.
Thank you, Mayor. So are you thinking that the lottery cost, if there's 8 or there's 100, is the cost the same? I mean, does it go down the more that enter, or? I mean, just a question. I know you don't have those numbers, but.
I hadn't really thought about it a lot because, candidly, I don't anticipate a large number of medical-only dispensaries being interested in that business model. I did call around and talk to 2 dispensary owners who have spoken in at council meetings to kind of gauge what they thought. And one of them, he basically said, yeah, I think you will, because while it's illegal today, we're always thinking about, this is a changing industry, laws are changing all the time. Mm-hmm. And the other one said, no, I don't think you're going to see more than a couple. And so, it didn't really help me much. So there's a non-answer for you.
I agree with you. I don't think there's going to be a huge.
If there were 100, it'd be a lot of review and to do. I mean, I think there would be a lot of staff costs if there were that many to review in such a short time before we have a lottery.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Bertricki.
Could you break down a little bit further what you see as being the cost to code enforcement? What are they actually doing?
I'll stall while Wyeth gets up here, I guess, but I always envisioned it being not much different than what they're doing today, largely complaint driven. So if there's more to it than that, I'll turn it over.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and thanks, Mayor and Councilmember Bertricki. Yeah, I mean, I think what we've been trying to work through with this in this conversation and talking with Andy and other staff is, yeah, we deal with complaints and people call, and sometimes it's a valid complaint and sometimes it's not. And we have a lot of the new ordinance has a lot in there. We're still, I mean, there's conversation going on in terms of coordinating with the state as well. And so that's what we're trying to envision is how does that work? We get a call for a complaint. Hopefully it's specific to what the issue is, and then we go out and go through our process to investigate and find out what the situation is. So that's what we're trying to capture, and it can be a variety of things there.
Follow up to that. Do you have a sense then of how you would break down that $33,000 between the cost of vetting the applications on your staff and then the following up on complaints?
Councilmember Bertricki and Mayor and Council, I get, we have right now when the initial applications come in, we're looking at the zoning compliance, and obviously we'd be looking at our new zoning in the ordinance and then coordinating on the other license requirements in the ordinance. So I envision that being a little more than what it is right now for a normal business license review because of those other criteria that we have to look at. And then also, again, and we've got more to talk about, to be frank about the process, because if they're applying and we get through the lottery and they get approved, somewhere in there, we're having to check a whole bunch of things about where they're going to be and whether they're doing all the things they're supposed to do at the site. So there's some more hands-on back and forth activity there that we're currently not seeing except for the massage license process now, where we are active inspections, checking, and then, going through that process, we're coordinating with finance.
I'm just trying to get a sense, is that number based more on your anticipation of the complaints we're getting, or is it more, that initial process?
I think I think the complaints, we're trying to be prepared for what kind of and how many extra complaints we might get. But again, we're going to have to see, and that was one of the reasons when Andy mentioned that regarding our staffing, is to say, we want to be really careful that we don't, the levy, public safety levy approved 3 new code enforcement officers. Those were approved. They weren't supposed to, there was no connection exactly to say, oh yeah, one of those is going to do marijuana regulation all the time. But we're trying to be strategic to say, we know there's going to be this new cost. We know we're also going to add those officers. Can we kind of ease through that process so that at some point we haven't lost the cost and we know what it is, and we then can figure out what is that position or part of that position doing. So it's
right
really,
now, this is more of just a kind of global, both of them kind of estimate.
I'm sorry?
This is more of an estimate of all of the costs for
the process, yeah. But again, we do spend, the complaint part is often pretty time intensive. So we're trying to figure out what that is.
I'm just trying to get an idea if it's 10,000 versus 23,000 or something like that.
Wyatt, that kind of begs the question, should we expect a more proactive enforcement, or do we follow the usual pattern of being solely complaint-driven? I would advocate for the first, since we're only talking about 18 businesses, not 1,800 or 18,000, at least to get our feet on the ground. Shouldn't we be stopping by whether there are complaints or not?
Mayor and council, I think that again is something to figure out as we do the process, because I think the idea is, again, with the language and the requirements in the ordinance, it in my estimation does go more proactive just by what's expected in there and what we're going to have to be checking throughout, as the businesses go through the process, get licensed and start operating. So I think there is going to be a little more, it's not just going to be, comply and, waiting for those complaints in some situations, because there's going to be things we're going to be checking on, kind of regularly. But again, we're trying to get our hands around that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ewald, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Going to a couple of those meetings on that marijuana and talking about the costs and that, you can't just say, well, we're going to throw a half inspector, code enforcement officer on there and then use them all someplace else. If you're going to put half a full-time employee for code enforcement on it, they have to justify their half time on this to be legal, don't they? And I agree with the mayor. Being reactive, complaint-driven isn't the way we want to start this out. I think we want to start this out being proactive. And that's why we got the half a code enforcement officer in there, and that, whether it's the morning or the afternoon or 2.5 days a week, and they spend the other 2.5 days in the office doing other stuff, but I think they have to substantiate their time on this, and I think they need to be proactive.
Yeah, I guess just to, again, and maybe that was a little bit unclear, but that's what we're assuming that amount of time and that person is going to do. I think what we're trying to figure out then is, as we we're not going to just hire a half a person, obviously, or a half-time person. We're going to say, okay, we're going to be strategic so that position, a full-time position comes on, half of their time is, like you just said, the marijuana piece, and that's their focus. And then depending on what starts to happen there, we'll be coming back and having that discussion about, are we adjusting, what's going on with that amount of time and what else they're doing. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Boyette.
I guess, I took the 18 businesses divided by 68,000, it's $37,000 for each of the 18 units. To me, this is really kind of a swag, I guess, this year. We're going to have to figure this out in a year after you give us more information. But I totally agree that transportation shouldn't be $55, because what happened when Uber hit here, we had so many people that started into this, and now it's gone down, but we just don't know the answer. And I think you're going to end up with more than a half a person involved in this over time. There has to be, and I want to be proactive, not reactive.
Okay, let's open for public comment, and we'll come back, council, and ask for some more specific direction. But oh, I'm sorry, Chris, you had your hand up?
Mayor and Council, the only thing really was spot on with what Councilmember Boyette said. This is not a question as to whether we're going to come back to you in a year. we're going to absolutely have to be back to confirm, oh, wow, we were spot on, or no, we underestimated or overestimated. In the end, let's just keep it simple. If it takes one full code enforcement officer to keep up with all this, we're not burning up one of the three, as far as I'm concerned. We're not burning up one of the three from the public safety levy. These fees will need to be adjusted to fully cover the cost of the 1 FTE it takes. If though, on the other hand, to your point, if it turns out that it only takes less than a quarter, we'll need to adjust downward and not overcharge for that anticipated time. So point being, this is a guess based on information we've been able to acquire, and we'll absolutely have to adjust it based on what happens in real life on the ground in Billings. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll open up for public comment now on item number 2, marijuana business license fees. If anybody would like to comment, please come to the podium. Just ask that you give us your name and address, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Thank you. Sir.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Anthony Sauer, and I live at 911 Miles Avenue. So I also work in the industry, and there's a lot of regulation in place. We have to follow a lot of compliance already, RFID tracking tags on all the plants, seed to sale tracking. So a lot of this is already handled by the Department of Revenue, and I think a lot of these fees are just incredibly high. You know, with those plant tags, they follow it throughout their life cycles. After they're harvested, a package tag's created. Every single sale is tied to that package tag, so we can always figure out, you know, if a recall needs to happen, you know, what customers we need to, you know, get a hold of and everything. But there's just so much meat there that we always have to follow, and they've got our thumb on us pretty good to where, and it's a good thing. You know, we want this. We want to be able to produce high quality medicine. We want to be able to give people exactly what they're paying for it, have the testing there, give them accurate information for the product that they're actually consuming, and not push this to the black market or anything like that. Safe product is the best product. It's already here. We need to have this all coming from dispensaries, not coming from somebody's house down the street. So yeah, to me, nearly all these estimates are based off of efforts that already overlap with current state regulations. I mean, does the city consider what happens if just 8 other businesses, or 16 in this case, come in from any other sector? I know that our dispensary, if these are the fees that are proposed, we will not be moving into the city. It's just pricing us out of the industry. As the state is already concerned, if you look at some of the fees that they're imposing, micro tier has increased 300%, tier 1, 150%, tier 2, 100%. Smaller businesses are going to be priced out of the industry if it keeps going like this. So, you know, Andy said there wasn't a plan to add another employee, and code enforcement's still complaint driven. So again, these fees are just incredibly high. I keep coming back to, we have compliance that we have to follow by the Department of Revenue already, and we should utilize some of that effort that they're already putting into this and not duplicate and waste taxpayer money when it's already being handled. Thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you. Sir, Mr. Sauer, I guess we have a question from a council member for you.
Sure, absolutely.
So you say you got all these regulations you have to follow? Mm-hmm. Does anybody come in and knock on the door and come in and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to?
They're allowed at any time, yes. In fact, we've had a couple of unexpected visits where they just knock on the door and they say, hey, I'm here for a surprise visit. We're going to go through all your package tags right now. In fact, the one day I took off this year, I was hanging out with my daughter, and we had an unexpected visit, so I came into work and we went through all the package tags in the entire place. Went through every plant, every tag, and anything that, you know, was missing, we had to take care of immediately and show that it was done properly.
Follow up, please.
Go ahead.
So who's the person that comes in and does the check-in?
Right now, my inspector is James Gardner.
State?
Let's see, I don't know if he's with the Department of Revenue or, shoot, my brain's
I'm seeing a nod that, yeah, he's with the Department of Revenue. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Sauer, how many of those surprise inspections have you had?
We've had, I believe, 2.
Okay, how long has your business been in business?
A little over 2 years.
So
about once a year.
About once a year, okay.
And we're also required to have an inspection at licenseship renewal every time. So before we're even considered to be renewed, we have to follow all the compliance, that we have to prove we're following all the compliance. And they check everything. I mean, we've gotten small demerits of, say, we can't have tags in the soil. Sorry, these tags are a little bit too dirty. My gun for the RFID tracking cannot read these tags. You need to get them out of the soil medium. And I mean, it's an easy thing to fix. We just move them up a couple of branches and we're good to go. But they are very meticulous on all those little details of clean things, packages of stickers on actual packages.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Any other, I'm sorry, Mr. Sauer, you're getting your exercise. I guess we got another question?
It's okay. So how much do you pay the state right now, and how much do you pay the city to have a business?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. Honestly, I wasn't even prepared to come down here until I saw all the stuff being talked about tonight, so I'm
So
sorry.
you don't know how much you have to pay the state for your business license each year?
I want to say that we're at tier 2, so $2,500 for that. I believe that's going up to $5,000.
Okay. And then what do you pay the city for a business license?
Right now, I don't know.
Oh, you're in the county. Okay.
Yeah, I guess if we're not in the city, nothing.
Oh,
so.
okay. All right, sorry. All right, thank you.
All right,
Anybody
very good,
else?
thank you. Thank you. Any other public comment on item number 2? Please come to the podium. Don't see anybody coming, so we will close the public comment period on item number 2. Back to council. Council, just to keep us moving here, I'm going to throw open a suggestion just based on our previous conversation. This is not intended to be the end all of anything, but what does the council think of directing staff to come up with some number that increases that $55 transporter license but reducing the others so that the net effect is to generate the same amount of revenue proposed anyway. And then also, and this is more based on my thinking than anything anybody else said, but also add in a line item for administrative cost that would include the city administrator, the city attorney's office, council, so that we don't lose track of that in future years, again, being cost neutral on the overall $68,000. So just to throw something out as a starting point for your consideration. Council, how do you want to proceed? Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question with that proposal is that we're just kind of moving money around. There's no justification for it. And right now they've done some research saying that they think code enforcement, they think that fire, they think that all this. I agree the transportation, I think, is very, very low. But I don't know if I agree we just raise that and lower everything else unless we truly believe that we're decreasing something. And I don't know that these numbers are realistic or not, to be honest with you. It's the first time I've seen them. So, but I don't know about just moving money around to move money around.
Okay, thank you very much. Further discussion? Well, Councilmember Neese?
I don't disagree with what your suggestion is, Mayor. I would kind of like to see something different come to us, but I also think we're estimating the number of businesses that are coming into the city. I think it's too low. Of course, if you increase the number of businesses, the actual per license is going to drop down, which is going to then stop what some of these have complained about higher fees. Our licenses come in, and so I think some of the adjustments need to be done to license, and if we estimate too high, of course, next year we have to raise the rates, and if we estimate too low, then of course we're going to drop it quite a bit. So I think I don't know what the exact number is, but I think the conversations I had before we enacted the ordinance, they really did want to use the city services, and I anticipate them wanting to move in. But if the fees are too high, then they won't come into the city. They'll stay in the county and keep producing out there.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a question for Director Zeller. When you said $700, you contacted other cities in Montana to try to get a sense of some of this. Could you show that slide again? What does a $750 for Bozeman, what does that fee cover?
Councilmember Joy, I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, my understanding is Bozeman is only regulating for zoning. So if you're eligible to get the license at the state, then they're not doing anything beyond that. They're relying on the state to enforce that. And certainly, if that's the approach council wanted to go here, I think you would see drastic reduction in fees. But my assumption was that we would be enforcing the ordinance as adopted.
The other piece, and I'm not certain whether this is ultimately what they adopted, but it was my understanding that they were going to remove their cap. The cap brought a fair amount of work with the cap. So once they removed the cap, oddly enough, it really would take away a fair amount of the administrative work that would need to be done. So I think they're, in a speculation, that they're just looking at literally how do they cover almost like any standard business license, if you were fully incorporating, what does it take for all your divisions and departments to do a full review of that business application to make sure they're in the proper zoning, fire, and et cetera, et cetera.
Councilor Purinton.
So I just have a question for clarification. So if the county goes through with that recall vote this summer and it passes, because it's my assumption now that they're going to do all licensures for marijuana businesses. So that would negate everything that we're doing here, because if it's not in the county, then we can't do anything in the city with these other business licenses. Is that true?
I suspect that is not accurate, but we've not talked about it. So in other words, the way I'm interpreting your comment is that if county voters were to disallow any of the businesses to operate marijuana, that would mean all of Yellowstone County would be free or void of these businesses. My presumption is with what the statute did is it gave a fair amount of authority to both cities and counties so that you could have different regulations between some cities within counties, and counties could have different regulations. But I'm speaking about that very broadly. I don't know.
Councilmember Purinton, I think that there are some differing opinions on that, so I'd prefer to consult with some other jurisdictions, look at the law a little bit closer myself, and then come back to you with our opinion.
Because, and follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
Because if the city can continue doing these licensures, then we'll probably have more if they can't do it in the county. Is that correct? Is that a good assumption? Valid assumption?
Yes, and I guess I want to just contradict what Chris just said, is we are within the city, we are within the county, so my logical reasoning would say if the county prohibits anything, that we couldn't do it in the city either. So, yes, potentially. So I don't want to give a definitive answer at this point. I think that we need to look I need to look closer at the language that's in the bill.
Okay.
To be sure to give you a correct legal opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if I can ask staff a question. Andy, if you know the answer, and Wyeth or anybody who's worked on this, but do we have an average or a rough idea of the capitalization cost of each of these businesses, any of these businesses? If they're the cost of a Kool-Aid stand, these are very high fees. If this the cost of a bottling plant for Coca-Cola that's going to cost $30 million to get up and running, these are decimal dust at best. So we heard testimony before that a lot of these are, multi-million-dollar operations. For every $1 million, I guess $10,000 would be 1%. So these are small potatoes, but I don't really know the size of these businesses. Do you?
Mayor, I don't have any idea. The two dispensary owners that I talked to, when I threw out fees of $5,000 to $10,000, they both were quite shocked at how high that was and indicated that would be far too cost prohibitive. Now, candidly, they may have a vested interest to take that position, but I got the sense that they were sincere, and so I guess I don't know, and I didn't get the sense that they were multi-million-dollar operations, but I don't know.
Maybe that's something you could look into between now and when you come back. I would recommend that because that's an important element, at least in my thinking. Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Tricky, and Boyette?
I think medical marijuana is rarely $1 million. There's certainly those businesses exist and they have franchises, but I would say in general, they're not generally raking in the dough to the same level that recreationals are. Your Honor, I wanted to respond to your kind of proposed motion, which is that I agree with you on the transport fee, that I think that needs to be brought into line with the rest of them. And then I'm curious what admin costs would be, what additional admin costs there would be besides what's already been included for the business licensure, because that goes under admin, is my understanding. So if there's other ones, I'm willing to entertain it, but to me, I thought that was addressing that, and maybe I'm wrong. The other piece that I would like to add to this is what I brought up earlier, is that I think the code enforcement costs need to be spread more equitably across all of these categories, particularly because right now they're all operating in one location, but they're going to be spread out. And so you're going to, all of these contribute to whatever issues the city is going to have. All of these categories are going to have code enforcement problems, and it's a whole chain. So we're breaking it out. So to me, I would say you take that cost and it should be spread evenly across all 5 categories. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Tricky and Boyette?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, so I too agree with the notion of changing the transport fee. I do not like the fees where they are across the board. I would not go over $1,000. I think most of us think of this as being a big business. Most of these are not big businesses. Most of these are family run, a couple of 2-3 people who are doing them. And you know, and we have to keep that in mind for the short term. Especially since what we're looking at here is we're trying to enable the local small businesses to get a foothold before the market is totally blown open in a year and a half. You know, so if we price them out of even applying for it at the very beginning, and this is what I've been saying all along, we're basically saying, okay, fine, thanks all you small businesses here in Billings. Take your monopoly money and go home. And I can't support that. I am looking forward to seeing what the numbers actually are in a year. I look forward to, you know, being able to adjust to that. I hope that in that time period, you can begin to get a sense of what the general business application fee is costing us, so that we can deal with that, you know, so that we can see that in the context of what we're looking at here. Because essentially what we're asking here is what is the additional amount of money we should be charging specific businesses that we want to regulate more than all the businesses that we're not regulating. And the last thing is another data point. I'm just kind of curious if we can find out how many sheriff calls, how many code enforcement calls, anything like that have gone to the medical marijuana businesses in the county over the last year. You know, these are a couple of fairly hard data points that I think would kind of help us get a sense as to what we're really dealing with. But I cannot support a $4,000 fee for a medical dispensary. You're talking $300 a month for a small business, and I know in my family business that would hurt a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Boyd and Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. We're only trying to recover our costs. This isn't a pizza parlor. This isn't a lumber company. We know that there's going to be issues. We're not going to make money. I do think the code enforcement the first year is going to be at least a full-time person driving around. This is a swag again. We're guessing. I don't like an amount that ends in $41. Can't we just make this even across the board for the first year, then sit down and say, where do we send the people? Are we not? If we're not sending them, we don't need the code enforcement officer. If we're sending them to the cultivator all the time, maybe that's where the price should go up and something else should go down. But we have to at least cover our cost. If it's $68,000, make it simple and divide it by the 18 and then worry about it next year, or not worry, but reevaluate next year after we hear from Andy and from Wyatt, because we don't know what we're doing at this point.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Bernice, Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, you said you had a program that you could kind of put up there and change some numbers. Can you pull that up and do the code enforcement 20% across the board? Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you. I'd like to have some time that we can kind of plug some of those numbers in, as far as also maybe increasing some of the number of businesses coming to the city, to kind of see what that does to the licenses. Thank you.
Councilmember Ronning.
I'm not sure if this is for Chris or Andy, but have you all discussed yet, or is this something that's going to be discussed with City Council? And I realize that the tax, the 3%, the small portion that the 3% that the city will get from both the recreational and the medical, I realize that's still just a projected number out there. But has there been any type of dedicated conversation as to what that money will be eventually used for, or how that will play in? Could that fund, that money coming in, be applied towards some of these code enforcement costs, things like that, so it would reduce this? Just curious.
So, Councilmember Ronning, Mayor and Council, so I would say no, there haven't been relative to, in fact, affecting permitting. I suspect you absolutely could. You could say that revenue is going to be, we're going to use it to offset permitting costs. Now, if we're looking at what I think or what we've heard from Colorado, I hope this isn't misspeaking, as much money as they're bringing in, they still, I think I've heard, for every dollar they're bringing in, there's $4 in cost. So what we have been talking about is how are we going to track cost. This is, I'm going to speculate a little bit, the easy part, not estimating this, but once we should be able to tell you after 6 months, a year, where this is going. What's going to be a whole lot tougher is telling you what the effect and cost has been on law enforcement, on public, prosecution, those costs. And we are having conversations about how do we track that so that we can effectively communicate not only with you, but we're anticipating with legislators and governor and the state of Montana to say, hey, great news, the 3% is what? Or no, bad news, the 3% isn't close to covering what our costs are, and here are what our costs are. Guess who's subsidizing this? The property owners in Billings. So that's where we're talking about trying to track and understand what are the impacts of these changes to our overall cost as a city.
Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just a question, City Administrator Kukulski. Do we do that with alcohol?
We don't. I think it's a great idea. I think, frankly, this opens up a discussion. I can tell you we bring in barely 6 figures off of, in fact, I don't even know that we bring in $100,000 off of anything from alcohol. There is not a local alcohol tax, but I can assure you, like other substances, the taxpayers are spending millions of dollars dealing with the effects of all of these various substances, alcohol, marijuana, other drugs.
Thank you. 2 quick points from myself. One is, I think if staff has a to-do list, getting data on what other states are charging, other communities are charging outside of Montana would be very helpful, because they've got a lot more experience. I just did a 15-second Google search of Colorado local fees, and it was like $2,500 if I was understanding. So maybe that was a flat rate created by state statute. I don't know. But if we don't have that data, I think it would be helpful. And the other thing is, I was intrigued by Councilmember Boyette's concept that you just take these costs and divide by the number of expected businesses. And I think, well, that's not fair. I mean, don't we want to be more surgical than that? But then I started to think, well, you wouldn't have laboratories if you didn't have dispensaries, and you wouldn't have dispensaries if you didn't have testing opportunities and transportation opportunities. So they really are all part of one industry, and they are all dependent upon each other, which sort of justifies a little bit of sharing of both the, whatever you call it, risk or benefit. So I think that helps to justify some degree of a more even field. I don't know whether a flat rate of that is justified, but they're all in it together, so to speak. So, Chris?
If I could just add, Mayor, one of the things I think is difficult when we look, because we did do some research, when you look at other communities, again, this is about trying to recoup our cost. So if we're licensing recreational marijuana, this is a different conversation, at least based on the conversations we had with folks who educated us from Colorado. They were talking about auctioning, licenses, and that there are communities in California that licenses are worth 7 figures, 8 figures for that license. This is so comparing to other cities, pretty darn difficult when we are only allowing, medical under these circumstances. So I would caution us a little bit about how much research we do relative to what others are charging. We're supposed to be charging enough, but not too much to recoup our anticipated cost. And our cost may or may not be different than the cost in other states or other cities or other communities.
Okay, thank you very much. Andy, did you want to comment?
Well, I have an answer for Councilmember Neese. So what we did is just change the allocations here for code enforcement to equally 20% per allowed use. I had retail originally, but obviously that's not in there anymore. And so this is the column you really should be looking at. But if we have those same number of licenses, you'd be looking at an individual license fee of approximately that. And I just rounded to the nearest $5 to come up with those originally, but those are the old ones that were proposed here. So I think you just had asked if you would spread it equally rather than concentrated in dispensaries. What would you see? And that's what you'd see.
Thank you, Andy. That does change quite a bit. In fact, the transporter jumps really high because there's only 2 and testing is really high. And
yeah, you're only spreading it over 2. If I may, Mayor, these were just my notes that when I was looking at those locations. So Grand Rapids, they had similar classifications. These were the number of licenses within the city limits of Grand Rapids. They had no testing. There were 17 in the whole state of Michigan, but none of them were located in Grand Rapids. I don't know if you want to draw any conclusions from this, but those were the numbers I had and kind of how I arrived at my guess.
And they're about...
And just to clarify, I wasn't talking about number of businesses, I was talking fee structure.
I understand, yeah, but there was some discussion about the number of businesses estimated and compared to elsewhere, so.
Great, thank you. Okay, Council, we need to move on this evening. We've got other things. Councilor Brown?
I just have, I'm dead now. If we find that we've just grossly overestimated, okay, what happens with that? I mean, would that apply to their next year's license fee? Does that just disappear? I mean, obviously, we didn't use that money.
So, Council Mayor, I would suggest we not create some mechanism where we're going to start tracking refund. I mean,
and I'm not saying that if there already is one, but
So honestly, I mean, I too, as we're learning and having a dialogue here, and we shouldn't leave here tonight. And if tonight there's traction around this concept, the idea of just charging an equal number for everybody divided by 18 or divided by the right number is as rational as anything else we're doing here. Everything we do to refine this is an estimate based on an estimate based on an estimate.
Right.
But could you? Absolutely. If the council said, you know what, we want to refund those folks who overpaid, that could be done. It'll have to be tracked. And where will you draw the line as to who's getting refunds and who isn't if we've overestimated? If we underestimated, I doubt we can go back and say, hey, we were really off on this one. Your fee's now $8,000, not $4,000. We're going to eat that, so.
okay, thanks.
Okay, Councilor Pearson?
So if you're saying that you want to raise the transporter fee, are you basing it on anticipated code enforcement? I mean, how would you raise that fee?
Let me answer that, and then anybody else can add to it. One possibility might be to, rather than only looking at the two ends of the spectrum, one, you try to very surgically come up with the exact cost per type of business on one hand, or the other, you just take the total cost and divide by the number of anticipated businesses. Maybe we do what we do with utility charges, which is you got a certain base charge because you got access to water. And that's a privilege. You know, you've got access to this type of business. And so I'm just making a number up. We take 25, 30% of the total cost. We spread that across to transporters. And then we take the remaining 2/3, 3/4, something like that, and we try to divide that up in a more surgical way based on actual predicted costs. So the net result of that would be, using my example, a transporter would end up paying 1/18 of about 1/3 of the total cost, whatever that math comes to. But that might be one scenario. But maybe others have better ideas.
Mayor, I guess I'm leaning more towards this is an industry that's just divided up by the number, whatever the correct number is. I think the number we have here is probably going to be too low. We need to add a few there because I think we'll have more in cultivators, and that's, as I said before. So I think that would be fair, at least for the first year. And then if we want to get strategic about it the next year, we find that code enforcement is spending half their time out at dispensaries, then next year we come up with a different formula. But I think it would be quick and easy to just get the number, divide it, this is what the fee is going to be, and then move on to next year, let's reevaluate it. Because it is an industry, and I think that's a good rationale to create a fee structure.
And just to clarify, if you divided the 68,000 by 18, I think Councilmember Boyd, you said you did the math, it must about $3,700 a head? 47. 47?
37. I think it was.
Is 37.
37.8. Okay. Call it 3,800 ballpark. Okay, Council, we're going to have to move on. So where are we at? Chris?
Well, part of what, and I know, on the one hand, I want to move on. But on the other hand, in fairness to Andy, what do we bring back? So we don't have to define this tonight, but I think this idea of flat rate, no flat rate, that's really helpful if you want to go there, a majority of you or not, because that's a big swing. What we're going to bring you on the 20th, you're going to figure this out on the 20th. The night of December 20th is the night you're going to adopt. So you want to stay away from this flat rate concept, or do you want to go towards this flat rate concept? Because that's quite a bit of difference, I think, in what we bring you. And we're all throwing numbers around them. I added 25 businesses, and I added just $75,000 and costing them $3,000 apiece. So
I guess, Chris, because we do need to move on to our next item, and I don't think we're going to reach any ultimate, the light bulb's not going to suddenly go on here. Would it be acceptable for staff to go back, fiddle with what they've heard today, come up with option A, option B, option C, option D, fiddling out some of these numbers, and then we can debate some of it by email and come back at our next council meeting, not on the 20th, but in 1 week. Well, I guess it's not on our agenda. We'd have to change the agenda.
Your packet's already done for next week.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, Councilmember Shaw.
My suggestion would be we have a committee for this, so maybe the committee could meet in the next 10 days to hammer some of this out and not throw that all back on Andy.
Councilmember Yakowicz.
Make a motion that we do a flat rate.
Make a motion to direct staff.
To direct staff to work on a flat rate for the first year.
Okay, and only that to be presented on the council's December 20th agenda, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, not just one of multiple options, but the only option. Councilmember Boyette, that's a second from you. Okay, Council, you have a motion to direct staff in that direction. Councilmember Neese, Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
I'm sorry, I recognize Councilmember Neese first,
sorry.
but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll support the motion, but I would like to make sure that if, I think the number needs to be adjusted. And so we talk about flat rate. Do we still want the committee to meet to kind of discuss some of that? I would be in favor of that just to make sure we've got the right numbers.
Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Councilmember Neese sort of addressed what I wanted to say, which is that I think because the committee has put so much time and effort and they have knowledge that those of us not on the committee have not probably dug into like they have, I think it would be very helpful for the committee to look at this and really dig into it and decide whether or not that's something that should be brought forward to the entire council. Thank you.
Okay, so I think, I don't know if that's a motion but if staff, I don't know that it's necessary to have a motion, but if as part of this process, you could reconvene some city administrator group of council members to kick it around, that would be helpful. I heard that from Councilmember Shaw, hearing it from Councilmember Joy, Councilmember Boyetz. I see some nodding heads. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, right? So, Chris, would that be okay as part of this process to involve
Absolutely. I think you just need to decide if you're going to vote or take the motion off the table. I think you got a motion in a second, but we can convene administratively the committee to throw around some ideas of whatever comes out tonight, and we'll have to do that very quickly, because this packet's got to be done and out the door for you less than a week from now. So,
I think Thursday.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Council, more discussion on the motion to direct staff to come back with a flat rate option, which maybe has some sub-options, depending on what you might add or decrease or whatever, but discretion in the hands of staff and that group of council members. Further discussion, though? Any further discussion? If not, I guess we will go ahead with a vote. We'll just do it a voice vote. If it's unclear, we'll do it a hand vote. Actually, we probably should have a hand vote just so we can get it clear for our minutes. If in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Council, all members voted in favor with the exception of Councilmember Tricky. If opposed, raise your hand. Councilmember Tricky. Thank you very much. I guess that's, you got some marching orders.
Thank you.
Okay, and that concludes then item number 2. We'll
Briefly, before you
Yes.
conclude that item, could I, not a vote, but ask those members of the committee to raise their hand? I'll get an email sent out here. Cheriki.
I think I was on that.
Sorry.
Just keep going until you get 5.
All right.
I don't think anybody cares who's on that particularly.
Well, I've got 6, so I've got one too.
Mayor, he leaves if someone.
And I'm going to be gone in Florida, so the odds of my being available are unlikely.
Okay, I'll send something out here for tomorrow or Wednesday, so watch your emails. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Council, it's 8 minutes after 7. Original goal was to get through the regular meeting, and then we could break for executive session at our break, but that's looking less likely. Chris, you're a presenter for item number 3.
And I have to take full responsibility for part of the blame for dragging out that last conversation, but it really is helpful having some direction, because when you get here on the 20th, you want to know where you're going. So I will keep this brief. It really is, you had the memo, hopefully it covered the basis. These are just concepts. The idea isn't tonight you're going to decide it absolutely, unless the decision is no, we do not want to entertain 1, 2, or 3. So the 3 ideas were, 1, as I said in my memo, got some interesting feedback. I've had council meetings on Monday for 20 of the 25 years, 22 of the 25 years I've been in this business. So long I'd forgotten what it was like when we had them on Wednesdays, and that's where the first community I worked in. But this conversation, I thought, really did resonate with me over the past year. It was a little over a year ago when we were talking and meeting in Great Falls as city managers, and they started to share some of the benefits they saw of moving from Monday to Tuesday. So keep it short at that, but the first question really is, does the council want to consider moving from Mondays to Tuesdays? There are some ripple effects as a result of that. You've got planning and zoning that right now meet on Tuesdays, and you have some task forces that meet on Tuesdays. Those task forces may or may not adjust their meetings because there is no formal connection between us, but if we do move ours to Tuesday, that will have some effect on planning and zoning, but I think they can adjust, and so you saw my rationale there. I'm pretty intrigued by it, but I've only heard from a few of you guys if you like this idea. Second up is the idea of work sessions and that more informal environment. Tonight, we've done, I think, as good of a job as you can do in this room of making it more of a dialogue than the formalities. I have some concerns about moving back and forth between locations and the public getting confused about locations. So I think no matter what we do, I would hope in the new council chambers at the new city hall that we would set up that council room so that we could go back and forth from, the formality of council meetings to work sessions. But do you want to do something sooner than that? We put out the idea of the library. Why is it important to figure that out? Because the room is very, very sought after. If we want to do this, we do need to kind of put a stake in the ground and say, okay, Gavin, we need the community room for these evenings through 2022. And then the third issue has been one we've hinted a little bit in conversation about, which is, and hopefully the memo gave you the good background information, that we think firmly, legally, you can participate as an elected official via live video conference. So would you want to adjust your rules of procedure and allow for that? And again, if it's no, we don't need to spend any more time on the subject. If it's yes, I would think you'll want to do a little bit of work around parameters for that. The extreme being, but maybe I'm wrong, that you wouldn't want one of the elected officials to be gone most of the time via video, or maybe you would say, you know what, I'm perfectly fine with that. So those are the three subjects. They all would require tweaks to our ordinance that specifies the night and the location that we meet. And right now we don't have any rules about participating via video. We do know from former, I think I'm going to get this right, Attorney General opinions, maybe that's using the wrong term, Gina can correct me, that you can't phone in to meetings. That's been determined over the past that phoning in is not an acceptable way to meet the constitutional requirement for being observed as an elected body. So you may, whether you want to start, Mayor, my suggestion would be just take them one at a time and see if we can get through 1, 2, or 3 of them. I'm curious what the council is thinking.
I will do exactly that. So we'll start with number 1. The concept is Mondays versus Tuesdays. I don't think the goal is to make a final decision on
absolutely.
that tonight. So if I suspect the question before us is more kill this baby in the cradle, or ask, it's an expression.
He's not running for mayor there right now.
That's right. That's right. You don't think that's a popular view? Yeah, okay. Or nurture and feed and caress this baby until it grows up to be a strapping youth to Tuesday meetings and asking staff to deal with that and come back. So something along those lines. What's council's thoughts, questions, pleasure? I saw council members Neese, Shaw, Tricky.
So quick question, Gina, can you refresh us? How many hours before the meeting does the agenda have to be published? And will this change, Chris, to you, will this change the requirement for the agenda being out to the public at all?
So currently our agenda goes out a week in advance, but about 48 hours is generally what is the bare minimum. There's no specific in state statute, but that's generally the guideline.
So my ad would be this. This really isn't going to change much because you could do it to meet that intent. There'd be a Sunday night posting by 5:30 Sunday night if you were going to have a Tuesday meeting, 48 hours, if you want to meet that intent. As Gina said, there's actually not a statute that mandates the 48-hour in advance, but the general rule of thumb has been 48 hours. So I'm going to say the difference between Monday and Tuesday, we're going to have packets and agendas no later than Fridays. I mean, in the absolute worst case, and that meeting's either going to be held Monday or Tuesday. And this isn't going to adjust that as if this went to Wednesdays or Thursdays. Now all of a sudden you got business days that you could possibly deal with the issue maybe you're bringing up, which is changing or creating meetings in shorter notice.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a quick follow-up. That's what I was thinking about, is what happens if we have to make a change. So Sunday night would be the deadline. So we don't look at business days or hours. We look at 48 just regular hours, and so the changes could be made to the agenda at
Let's use the example right now, Saturdays technically. How often have you ever seen an agenda change on a Saturday afternoon?
Never.
For a meeting? Almost never.
Okay, yeah, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Councilmembers Shaw, Triki, Brown, Joy.
Thank you, Your Honor. I was just realizing I would make a motion, at least for number 1, to move forward, but should we want to have public comment first? What would you like
Let's
the
do that.
procedure
Let's
to be?
try to
Okay.
confine it more to a little discussion and questions, and I think that's a good idea.
Okay, can I just give my thoughts real
Please.
quick then? Which is that, number 1, yes, I see so many responses from staff over the weekend, and I just always feel so terrible that you're having to do that. So I think that would significantly solve that problem. Number 2, I'm a little waffly on, only because the moving back and forth, I think, could get confusing for the public and possibly council as well. But I really like the idea, for sure. And number 3, I am a yes, but with parameters. I think a limited, I would advocate for a limited number of video attendances per year. And then I don't know about if there needs to be a reason, but I think if we put a limit on it, that would kind of naturally take care of itself. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, feel free to comment on all 3. I think we can do that more efficiently. Councilmember Shaw, Councilmember Triki, and Brown and Joy.
I was going to make a motion, but I'll just comment, yes to Tuesdays, yes to less formal work sessions, and yes to live video participation.
Councilmember Brown. And we'll add Councilmember Ronning to the list. And
I just have a comment that I don't know that the timing is great on this, because you have 4 brand-new council members coming on in less than a month, and it will affect them. I know that they've all planned, this is Monday night, but regardless, doesn't affect me, so I'll just comment. The days of the week, I don't think that would have made a huge issue for me, other than I know I have Tuesday through Friday to travel at this point. I would say stay in one location for number 2, and for 3, I would say no. Work sessions, perhaps you could have a limited number of those, but councils, no, you got to be present. That's my opinion.
okay, Councilmember Joy and Ronning.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'd say yes to number 1. Yes to number 2, and a maybe on number 3. I think that us actually being in the same room makes a difference, a positive impact, so thank you.
When you say yes to number 2, are you saying yes to A or B?
Yes, to having a more informal setting, and locating back and forth, I don't think that would be a problem. I think that would be a temporary solution to us being able to not bump the back when we try to walk in the table, So I think that's just temporary. I think we can sit in ways that are more conducive to conversations and dialogue. Thank you.
Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. So I'm with Sean on number 1, leave that to the people that will be having the meetings, attending the meetings. But in regard to number 2, this is just my input. I think the community room is meant for the community, and these are the council chambers. And I think the community room at the library is meant for the community. It was great for emergency when we needed it. It was an absolutely fantastic space, but I think that there is such a high demand on that space by the community that I would hate to see government come in and remove that option for the community, because there's already limited numbers of space like that. And then in regard to the video participation, I have one question before I make my comment on that. Gina, is the public allowed to participate video, to give public participation, public comment?
It's my understanding that that was the idea, and that the opinion that I've given takes that into consideration, and that it allows more options for the public to participate.
Okay, so I agree. I would like to see more options for the public, but I'm 100% on board with what Sean stated. I think this is the job that people were elected to do, and you come here to do the job, and I think the public should be allowed to watch council members doing the job together, sitting here together face to face, and so I would disagree with City Council being allowed to attend through video. I think they need to be here in person.
Thank you. Councilmember Ewald, did you have your hand up? Councilmember Boyette and Councilmember Purington?
Thank you, Mayor. Tuesdays is fine. I like being here, and another year or so we'll all be over at the Stillwater building anyway in a nice room. And I said this when I first started, I can't believe in 4 years that one of us isn't going to be sick, having to travel because Aunt Susan died. I think and the world is changing. When I grew up, we didn't even have TV, yet video, this Zoom is the way to go. I'd like to see us be able to have, like the other night, Councilman Purington was sick. Well, she had to call in on the phone. She still has an opinion. I like the idea of being able to have it by televised. As long as the public can ask questions, she is seen, and we understand what she's saying, and people can ask questions. So, yes, we need to have this one yes on number 3.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, on number 2, did you tell us what you thought, Councilmember?
Stay here.
Okay. Councilmember Purington?
The Tuesdays are fine with me. I would also reiterate that we don't vote on that until the new council members come on board. Where to hold council members, I would say, or the work sessions, I would continue with the council chambers. And I agree with Penny on that one. And as far as the video conferencing, I agree with Mike Boyette on that. It's kind of a new world. I think certain circumstances, I could have been here when I had my cold, but I don't think anyone would have appreciated that. So I do agree that we could do some video conferencing or participation as long as you have certain parameters, and we could go over those parameters and to make that happen.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll comment, and then we'll open up for public comment, and then we'll come back, and I would ask then for motions on each individual item instead of as a package. So first, I'm in favor of Tuesday meetings I'm in favor of directing staff to look into it further, come back, tell us exactly what the conflicts would be. I have some concern about planning department staff who have to be at a planning board meeting when they're making land use presentations here at the same time, and how that would work.
They can't be on the same, for practical purposes, they can't be on the same night. I'm sorry, we'll need to move theirs because so many staff are reliant on being in both places.
Okay, so we start pushing our finger in this balloon and something's going to happen elsewhere, and what would that look like? But anyway, direct staff to try to flesh out the Tuesday option. Second, I don't see that the benefits of being in a more informal space like the library outweigh the hassle for the staff to move stuff, the uncertainty of, was this, where were we last week? And I'll be in the wrong place and we'll all get started late. So and then on third, I'm with Councilmember Boyette and Purington. It is the way of the future, both for the public, but also for council members. But with council members, we do need to have some parameters. Somebody's going to have to decide what those exceptions are, illness, travel, maybe if you're traveling every 2 Tuesday night to Laurel, that's not good. But something that has a cap on the number or something like that. And directing staff, again, to work on those details, maybe look to other communities. So with that, let's open it up, see what the public thinks. I see a couple council members-elect. Are they available on Tuesday would be interesting. So anyway, if anybody'd like to comment, please come to the podium. Tell us your name and address. And keep your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Hi, Tom Ripsis, 105 Legends Way. I see I was summoned up to provide my thoughts. So just real quickly, here they are. Tuesdays are fine with me. I think that's totally doable. Where to hold the work sessions, I thought the library was much more uncomfortable to sit and be an observer than this place is. But the going back and forth I get, and this one it works for me either way. And then I do agree that we should allow video participation, but with some parameters, probably quarterly or something like that, with the excuse of the mayor or something. I think that's perfectly reasonable and acceptable nowadays. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ed Gulick, 3015 10th Avenue North. Tuesday's fine for me. My week's going to be planned around this one way or another. I think that'll mean a lot of staff time to set up somewhere else and then set up here. So I guess I'm more inclined towards this. You're kind of in a semicircle. I don't have I really like the idea of really facilitating good group interaction. So I'll be interested in kind of seeing how that works out. I'll get a better sense, I guess, very soon. But I'm more inclined towards just staying here in the meantime. And then in terms of live video participation, I think there should be a limited number of remote. But, I think it's better to have someone remote than not at all, I think. So let's give them that opportunity. But it's with a preference, again, for people being here in person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other public comment on this item number 3? Don't see any, so we'll close the public comment period. Back to council. Councilmember Tricky.
I just wanted a little clarification about number 2. Were you really asking us whether we wanted to go back to the library or not? Or were you really asking us whether we wanted to have our work sessions be more structured, more informally?
Really was asking the second, because there is a lot of work that goes into going over to the library. So it really had to do with, and it was a dialogue we had at our staff retreat about creating a more collaborative conversational environment around work sessions. So,
okay, good, because that's what I said yes to.
Okay, Councilmember Denise.
Thank you, Mayor. I prefer Mondays, but Tuesdays will work, I guess. I'll just plan my vacations differently. Be home on Monday instead of Sunday night. But moving over to the library, in fact, I'm glad you brought this up, Chris, because that's not going to change whether or not we're more informal or not. It really depends on how the meetings run and how we participate. And so if we want a more informal setting, we just need to create it ourselves. On the live video participation, I'm with Sean on this as far as, and maybe Denise too, she mentioned that when you're in the room, it's a different feel. Council members need to be present. They need to be face-to-face. They need to see the expressions. They need to talk before the meetings, during the meetings. So I would not be in favor of the council members on video presentations. However, I don't, I said it before in the past, if we're going to open this up to videos, we're going to make it very easy to public to participate, which is good, and we're going to have a longer meetings with people participating because they're going to be allowed to participate and talk in the meetings, and that's okay. And we just want to make sure we do that. And then we won't be able to see the participants, we're not going to be able to see whoever is calling in, but they should be able to see us. But as far as council members, no, even on limited access, I would prefer no, they need to be present.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to direct staff to move forward with the idea of moving council meetings from Mondays to Tuesdays.
Okay, second Councilmember Tricky. Direction is to put it back in staff's bailiwick. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Neese?
The only concern I have is, we've had 2 elect weigh in on this. There's 3 others we don't know anything about. You're going to have a meeting with them here in a few days, so maybe just at least discuss it with them to find out if there's any kind of issues and problems with that. Otherwise,
Absolutely, and just so you know, the formality of any of this requires a first reading, second, it's an ordinance. So there will be a first reading, second reading, 30-day effective date. So none of this can officially happen until February if we moved as fast forward as we could. So,
all right, thank you.
March.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion? Not, the motion is direct staff to move forward to planning for the possibility of Tuesday meetings. If in favor, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay.
Nay.
Voting in opposition, Councilmembers Neese and Ewalt. Everybody else, I believe, voted in favor. Okay, thank you very much. Is there a second motion? Councilmember Boyette.
I'd like to direct the staff not to do anything about moving us to the library.
Sit on his hands.
Right.
Okay. Councilmember Brown. Okay, any discussion on that one? Councilmember Neese.
I guess as Chris said, he's really looking for more of an informal work session, not really moving us over there. So yeah, we can vote to say not to move to the library, but we're going to be in the same predicament. I mean, I would rather see the motion saying have the staff look at what we can do to be more informal during the meetings on work sessions than say whether we move or not move.
I would agree with that.
Okay, so Councilmember Boyette, there was, although the PowerPoint slide is explicitly about moving to the library, so we need to deal with that. But there was a suggested addition that the council or that staff, instead of just sitting on its hands, if it has some ideas for making discussion more informal, that it feel free to think about that and come back to us with those ideas. Is that consistent? Is that be a friendly motion to your?
I'm just looking at number 2. I think we should get rid of number 2 and then go to 2A.
Okay, so we'll stick with getting rid of number 2, which just deals with the library move. Any other discussion on that? If not, all in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay, motion passes. All council members voted in favor, with the exception of council members Joy and Cherokee. Believe? Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, is there a 2B dealing with the directing staff to make us friendlier? Councilmember Neese.
I'll make a motion to direct staff to suggest some ways that the council work sessions can become more friendly or informal.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right, and Councilmember Purington has a second. Kind of the party committee or something like that. Okay.
Staff's going to have fun with this
Any
tomorrow.
discussion on that one? Any discussion on that one? Councilmember Purington.
And I don't know how this would work, but it's my understanding that the council sessions the work sessions used to not be recorded or televised. Is that true? Well, I guess it's true, but how did that work?
I don't know about televise. I know we still do different minutes. You'll notice there is no clerk here tonight. No, but there's still, I think this is a full quorum of the council, so without a doubt, there has to be some record of this formal meeting, so.
So you're saying that the televised version is the minutes, more or less?
We put a set of minutes together. There's minutes created from the recording. Specific to your question, does it have to be televised? There's not a mandate for televising, although we're looking with technology, frankly, of moving more that way of recordings being the official record instead of all the effort that goes into typing up what's said. So some would argue that the televising has affected the formality or the way conversations go. I would say that's a reality of the world. You're not going to get away from televising live public meetings. But
Okay, so the motion is for staff to look at ways to make work sessions more informal, more collaborative, however you want to describe it. Any further discussion? Councilmember Yakowicz.
Your Honor, trying to be brief. I'm really happy about Tuesday because my wife if she still watches it, Channel 7 is usually cannot show it when we have school board, so it's a great idea Tuesday. But for the meetings, the older council prior to Mr. Brown and I, they would meet at the Parks Department, the senior center, and they'd have dinner provided, and they would eat and then talk informally in that. So I'm not sure why that changed, but it may be worth asking some of the older council why that was like that. But that was very informal, and apparently they got along, but I don't know what happened that they shifted away from that.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll have a vote. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Okay. Last item, item number 3, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to direct staff to move forward with some kind of a plan for allowing live video participation by mayor and council members with parameters.
Okay, and Councilmember Shaw, to clarify, is that to include public participation and not just council member participation?
Yes, thank you, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And there's a second, Councilmember Boyette, you had your hand up. Okay, discussion on that motion, Councilmember Biakovich.
Well, I'll throw my 2 cents in, though I won't be here. I would side with Councilman Brown for a few reasons. I think you're opening a big can of worms. One is this will really rely on the mayor to run it, and I know you will do a good job, Mayor, but mayor after mayor will change this and will have an impact. The parameters absolutely should be there, but and I would prefer not bringing in public attendance right now. Let's talk about one thing at a time, right? So talk about the council. I think I also worry about staff because you also are biting off more than maybe you can chew when you're proposing this, and then we got all these glitches and all this happening all the time. It makes us look bad. I just think that this is a little bit more than what we can do right now, and put it in ordinance that makes it for years to come. I really worry about it, and I think it could get out of control, and we would really regret it. So I like the idea that, hey, Bob is sick and he can, it's an idea, but hey, stay home and be sick, I mean, you don't need to come to council. Give the person a break. So that's where I'm at with that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Boyette.
And realizing we're just talking about this. This isn't a reality. I just think that we should at least look at the options with the technology today. I realize that our Zoom hasn't done very good here. It's been not that good. We tried it and it didn't work, and we haven't seen it since then. But what's wrong with looking at the future? That's all I'm saying, is look at it.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Ewald. Councilmember Neese.
That year that we were on virtual city council is the longest year of my life on council. I mean, there was nothing better than when we got back in the library and we could look at each other, and during break we could talk about things. You get so much more done, and I think the business world is finding that out too. I talked to some people that work in offices, and we can work from home, but you don't get the same amount of work done as the person sitting just across that bay from you, and you go over and go, what do you think of this? You start bouncing ideas off of each other, and you get way more done, and I think that's not going to be the thing of the future like everybody thinks.
Thank you very much.
I won't be here, so I don't care.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. And that you guys are reminding me that, that year long of being on Zoom and so many guests that we had and staff that we couldn't hear and couldn't understand. And it's not just our technology, it's their connectivity as well. And it just really disrupts the meeting. So I really don't think it's time, and I won't support the motion to move that way.
Thank you very much. I'll just comment that to Councilmember Yakovich's point, I think it's a good one that we need to probably have options where you would have a way to start small, because kind of like marijuana regulation, it's probably easier to liberalize down the line, but it may be very difficult to make those rules more restrictive. be it council members or the public who've really become used to something. So just something to keep in mind. Council member Purington and Boyette.
And I agree with Mike Boyette that I think it's something just to look at it, to see what it can do. I agree that year on Zoom was horrible, but we also had some options there, which I thought were good. I didn't like it whenever council was meeting, but yet staff was on Zoom. I think we liked having them there as well. So, and I think this is I think it's for really set parameters for that, because you don't want people taking advantage of it. I think it would be difficult for the mayor to run a meeting via Zoom and everyone else be, together. So anyway, I will support this, but I do believe that we need to look at parameters, and whether or not it flies, I don't know yet.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Boyd and Councilmember Ronning.
Again, to me, this is just the exception, not the rule. It has to be a reason why the person's not here. And I agree, you're not going to be on vacation every week, but to me, this is the exception, not the rule, and we should at least explore the future.
Thank you, Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I'm all about exploring the future and understanding that technology is a part of the future, but the city also just spent millions of dollars on a brand new building. I think the city council should be inside that building. I think the taxpayers just purchased a huge building, and city council and the staff should be inside that building and respecting the money that was spent on a brand new facility. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much. Let's move to a vote. I'm sorry, Councilmember Tricky.
Just 2 things to consider. One, I definitely think we need to consider it, and I definitely want to see staff considering it. One of the reasons is because we are moving into a new building, and this technology, if we're going to be using it, needs to be integrated into it from the very beginning. The other thing I would say is that I started working remotely when I was at Verizon in 1999, and there are good things about being remote, and there are bad things about remote. There are good things about being in place, and there are bad things about it. And it's not the same for every person. Every person's experience is not the same. Frankly, I would much rather be sitting in a Zoom meeting right now than squished in here with all of you guys, because this, just hits into my anxiety, and it makes it a lot harder for me to maintain and think about what I'm doing. Whereas in a Zoom meeting, I've been doing meetings like Zoom meetings for over a decade, and I have no problem whatsoever, so don't say no because you can't see how it's going to happen. Let's see what it might look like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to a vote. Chris, I'll just to say to staff, if this passes, I'd sure like to see a survey of what other communities are doing, not just in Montana, but our peer communities. Presumably, we can learn something from what they do. Okay, Councilmember Yakovich.
Yeah, it just, and I appreciate what Mr. Boyette is saying about future, because I think we all want to look for the future. When I hear ordinance, though, that's a little bit different, right? So then that's a law that we're working at. So if Mr. Kukulski is saying, hey, let's try it out for a year, that sounds cool. I like that idea. But if he's saying an ordinance is a law that you abide by for mayors from now on. So am I correct there? If that's what you're striving for, that's what I'm...
Well, with the conversation that's been brought up today, I would say without a change to ordinance, it's maybe around Gina, which is to have any parameters around this, we're going to need an ordinance. We're going to need a law. And right now, there are no parameters around it. The parameters would be what the state has given us as to what was not lawful prior to this technology, but now with the technology, good or bad, you now have a changing environment where statutory, or the conversation is, you can meet the constitutional observation rules. So I just wanted to see, no. I mean, if this vote goes down no, then we won't put more effort in figuring out. If it's yes, there is a fair amount of work to do over time, won't be the newest top priority, but to figure out how to do this, how would you do it well? What are other communities doing?
Yeah, and Councilor Yakovich, I guess I would just comment to say that we have these very detailed ordinances now on meeting protocol, which are part of our ordinance. And so to the extent we did anything that would be inconsistent with that, we would have to amend those. But because a lot of our participation may not be spelled out in here, I would think we might want, in order to have maximum flexibility, just put it into resolution if the goal was to be more flexible. But if it's inconsistent, we're going to have to change this. If it's neutral, then maybe we could do it in a more easily amended fashion. But we'll look to our city attorney to guide us on that when we get to it. Okay, council, if the motion is clear, which again is to direct staff, this is council members Shaw and Boyette's motion, to direct staff to develop some plan and further information on possible participation by council members and the public by live video. If in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. If in opposition to that, please say nay.
Nay.
So we will go to a show of hands. If in favor of that motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are council members Shaw, Cole, Chiriki, Purington, and Boyette. If voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition, council members Yakovich, Neese, Ewalt, Joy, Ronning, and Brown. So the motion fails, 5 in favor, 6 opposed. So, Chris, you've got your marching orders on that, or your non-marching orders, I guess, more accurately.
Thanks for the feedback.
Okay, council, that concludes our regular agenda, but we've still got public comment on non-agenda items. With your permission, we will not take a break, and we will just try to finish this up, our meeting, before breaking for our closed session. Is that okay with you, council?
We have some council discussion that might take more time.
This would be Councilmember Ewalt's issue on, and things on top of that?
I think we should take a quick break.
Okay, all righty. Okay, all right. Well then, thank you for alerting us to that. So it is 7:46. We'll try to come back before 7:55 and renew our meeting.
They're going to want to get into this issue about Department of Corrections.
Okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
It'd be nice, the library was nice because the junior.
But you still would have to turn around and look at someone.
That's very good.
Thank you, everybody. We'll get started again. Councilmember Boyette was complaining about his seat arrangements. And so, Councilmember Boyette, you know, they have a simple solution to that on airlines. You just pay for a nicer seat. So I would direct staff, or ask for a motion, direct staff to come up with some sort of a lottery system where, you know, we would just each bid for your favorite seat and something along those lines, maybe?
No, I just want the Stillwater building, the new city hall to be built sooner so we'd have a room.
Okay, all right. Chris, if you get that done by our next meeting, that would be very helpful. Okay, we left off at the items of council discussion. I know we've got a few. We'll just Councilmember Boyette. Or I'm sorry, Councilmember Purington.
We don't look alike.
No.
So, Chris, whenever the initiative passed that Frank and I put forward a couple of weeks ago, it passed, but there was really no clear direction, I think, for you and Gina to move forward with, well, so it passed, what do we do with it? So in talking with one of our local legislators that does serve on Law and Justice Committee, he suggested that we send a letter to the governor. And he made some points. I spoke with a couple of other people that had points, and they all felt it was a good idea to do a letter. And it's just showing it's that the city does want some action to be taken. And so that's where I put together this letter, and it's in outline form. And I knew that council, they approved to go ahead with the initiative to cap the number of, whether it's conditional releases, probation parolees, you know, all of those different groups that come to Billings. So these are just some points that I came up with, and I know it was important for council to look at those points. First of all, to decide whether or not you want to send a letter to the governor addressing these issues. And two, what elements do you want to put in the letter? So I would just open it up for discussion in sending the letter, and then if there's any other points, or to take some of those points off.
Thank you, Councilor Purington. I'll just ask, who were you anticipating would sign the letter? Everybody, myself on behalf of the council, the city administrator, but saying this has been approved by the council. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do. I know that some of those other issues that we've had where we've been asked as a council to sign individually, there have been some that said, no, I don't want my name on that. And, you know, I think that's been honored. If the majority of council, or if unanimously the council says yes, then I would say that you could sign it on behalf of the council. If there's just a majority of council and they want their name on it, then I would say do it that way. I think that's also another element, who wants their name on it.
And it's kind of academic, since until there was an actual letter, we probably couldn't say who would get on board. So, Chris, you have any questions for us, or then we'll just ask the council?
So here, this is my thought. I think, and this is speculation, we've had some of the conversations, I think what's being talked about is a political letter, and I think it's perfectly appropriate from this political body to a governor or to legislators. And so I'd be careful, honestly, to not get it overly weighted with a bunch of administrative stuff, because then Gina's going to spend a whole bunch of time, and then she's going to end up telling you, this is clearly against state law, against the law. That's not the point you're trying to make. So I think you are trying to make the point, I don't care if it's against the law, I think you need to look at this problem that that somebody's contributed to. So I would really separate that, and it's not that we don't want to be helpful. I just think it really is a political letter from an elected body to another elected official or group of elected officials, and you really want to limit how much we're involved in it and not get really deep in the weeds about this technicality and that technicality. Because Gina's, by her responsibility, she's going to make sure she's not signing something or she's authorizing you to sign something that's not absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Council, any other thoughts? In particular, should a letter of some sort go to the governor from somebody? Council members Neese and Shaw?
Yeah, I think a letter, something like this, would fit well with what the city, county, state's trying to do now. And what I envisioned more of that initiative was really more of a, a request, and if we can make it to the governor, all the better. Then so I would say, yeah, if we can do a letter and it comes from the council, then I think that would help and tie it into that program they're working on now. So. Yeah, it formalizes the request and the need that we need to have some help here. So I think we should send a letter.
Thank you very much, Councilor Shaw.
I see zero harm in sending a letter. I think why not? And I think we should open it up to sending it to the state legislators as well. I was going to say for next steps, Pam, I would offer to help you write a first draft of this, and we could bring it back to council if that's the direction people.
Thank you very much. Council members Joy and Boyette, and then back to Councilor Purington.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think these are all issues that we know need to be dealt with, and we know that we are not the only partners that we need in order to accomplish some of the goals that we have set for our public safety. And I think if I were going to communicate to the governor a letter, I would want to communicate what our goals and vision for the city are in terms of public safety and how he helps to accomplish that. How he helps to accomplish that by his piece of what he's responsible for. And I think that would be, it could be, asking for an accountability, but it could also be very positive in that we're putting forward our vision of what we'd like Billings to look like and expecting some partnership in addressing and really accomplishing that vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Boyette and Purington, and Brown and Ronning.
I like the idea of a letter. I think it should be very simple, and it shouldn't be 15 different things. I think we should keep 1, 2, or 3 topics and very simple so that we're totally understood.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Brown and Ronning.
Yeah, I agree. I like the letter idea much better than kind of what was being kicked around before, making demands and, doing all of that stuff. I agree with Councilman Boyette. I think it should point out the problems and where can you help us out here. I think you're going to get more response that way, but I think we should also be involving, our elected officials as well, beyond city council, and see, if they would do something similar, because, they know the problem as well. So I think this is a great start and a great way to approach this.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Ronning, and then I'm going to just suggest that we ask Councilmember Ewald and ask Councilmember Shaw and Purington worked on a draft. Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. So I agree. I'm in all favor of sending a letter to Governor Gianforte, but agree, I think it needs to go to the state legislators as well. One of my previous boss, one of the real mentors in my life, as an employer, always required that whenever we brought a problem, we always brought 3 solutions as well, whether the solutions actually worked or not. I think that we also need to, in the letter, offer some, I'm not stating like these are the demands we think the solutions are, but offer some context of here are some of the solutions we think could help, but offer some positive feedback as well, that we've put thought into this, that we have some solutions and perhaps would like to be part of that solution making process. not sure how you want to do that, but, yeah, no, I support this. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Buell.
Thank you, Mayor. We were just talking about this same situation earlier tonight about the difference between being proactive and reactive. And everything that's happening with this $4 million is reactive. This initiative vote that we had 2 weeks ago where it went 10-1, that's a proactive move. We're telling them what our citizens are telling us. We are tired of this. The old George Henry restaurant, guy from Kalispell goes in there and spends the weekend and tears it all up, and that was our TIF dollars. But the Jake's stabbing, the people in Billings are starting to get tired of it, and that's what our job is to represent them. And I think we took a really good first step, and I think we don't want to back down. At least right away, we want to let them know that we're serious. We want to be proactive. We want to make this town safer. And by just letting anybody with a bus ticket to Billings come in here doesn't make this town safer.
Okay, thank you. Council, I just suggest that we task Councilmember Shaw and Currington and anybody else they want to rope into the process, including staff, which I do think has to be involved, to generate some draft that can be circulated for further input by the council. Is that sufficient for the current purposes? Without any motion, there's consensus? Okay. All right, that's what we'll do. Further items of general council discussion. Councilmember Brewald.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things that I worked hard on to get pushed through the council here, because when I got on the council, I found out that we're supplying services to a lot of people that don't live in the city, and we can't do anything about water prices. We can't do anything about sewer rates, but we could do something about landfill rates because that's not governed by the state. And we get garbage from Cody, Livingston, Big Timber, Roundup, all over. And when our landfill gets filled up, then we got to find a new place. So in 2019, I made a motion and council approved it that we increase above staff's recommendation, a 10% increase on the rates. And I also asked in that motion that be put in a separate fund for infrastructure improvements at the landfill. And at the time, I believe Mumford said that it was going to be in the neighborhood of around 400,000. It came back at 285. And so then it was still a real bargain for these out-of-city people bringing garbage here. And so the next year, I made the same motion, another 10%. That goes into a fund for infrastructure at the landfill. So, just curiosity, I sent an email to City Administrator Kukulski and Assistant Kevin and Jennifer DeRay, and the figures I got back were in fiscal year 20. With that first 10%, they brought in $285,270. In fiscal year 21, when now there was supposed to be a 20% increase, because it was 10% plus 10%, it only brought in $345,000, well, $346,000, but it was only that second 10% only brought in $60,716. Something's wrong. And so Jennifer noted that we had the two 10% increases, but then she put in, and this is on the CA report from November 18, 2021, that thus there are no additional landfill revenues being collected in fiscal 22. So according to what she put in there, I'm assuming that they're not getting charged that extra 20%, or it's not going into this fund. We got to get to the bottom of this and find out why this isn't happening. 60% for the 10% the second year. This doesn't add up. So something's not right someplace. When water rates go up, they don't drop them the next year and then just add on the cost for the next water rates. They just keep adding to it, and that's the way this is supposed to be working. So I don't know. I think something needs to be figured out and brought back to council. We don't have to discuss it anymore, but I think that both votes passed pretty handily on those to get more money coming into the city from these out-of-city places. So,
Thank you. Chris, is there any reason we couldn't get some sort of update on this accounting, confirmation that those charges don't go away, will continue, but a further breakdown?
No, and I did get to talk to Jennifer this afternoon to confirm. I think what we need to report back to you guys is how you want the money earmarked. All non-city residents who live in the state of Montana pay a 50% premium to use landfill, and that in large part came out of the increases that Councilmember Ewald advocated for and the council approved. If you're not a stater, you're paying double. You pay 100%. Those is completely legitimate, and that money all stays with solid waste. So I think the question is, I know in talking with Councilmember Ewald, he wants that money specifically earmarked for infrastructure at the landfill. The money that is in reserves or that we do collect does go into the reserve for the solid waste division. So we can get into some of those counting details, see what's there, make sure we're consistent with the motions that were made when the rates were set, because there clearly would be motions that the council did to set rates. And I don't recall anything that was to take away or not stack on top of. You don't have to keep every year reviewing the rate adjustment you made a year ago or 5 years ago. It's going forward. So we'll circle back to you, let you know what's been collected and how it's being earmarked per the motions that the council approved.
Okay, anything further? Councilmember Ewald.
So the reason that I made that motion that it be set aside separately is because this was in excess of what staff was requiring to keep the landfill open. This was an addition to it, so they're planning a $7.5 million improvements out there in the next couple of years. That's where this money should go to, so that they don't have to raise the rates for the people who live in the city of Billings. And that was the reason for it.
Okay, anything further on this item? Councilmember Brown?
I think the other question that comes to my mind now is if we had 270 something on the first 10, why is it only 60 some thousand on the second 10?
Yeah,
some accounting.
Yeah, we'll absolutely look into that. And an overarching, at the end of the day, you guys make that call as to what you want to set your rates at. And Councilmember Ewald is correct. Statutorily in the state of Montana, there's not nearly the limits on solid waste that there are in water and sewer. I would tell you, though, we need to be careful. Because if we're not conscientious about what we're doing and deliberate about what we're doing, we can push it, and the legislature will have no hesitation to come in here and run our landfill for us relative to rates. And so that's why last year we recommended going with, rather than just a percentage increase each year, well, how much is a premium that a non-city resident pays, and what should an out-of-stater pay to have the privilege of using our asset?
Okay, thank you very much. Are we ready for our next item, General Council discussion? Yes, Councilmember Ronnie?
Thank you. So I guess I'd like to have further discussion on the weekly and the information we received in the weekly regarding how council members can ask questions regarding things within the city and how it was presented to city council. So my strong encouragement, and I'm not going to be here next year, but I do want to leave it better. I want to leave that communication better than what it was when I got here. With that memo, I see it worse. And I can just go by my own experience and how grateful I have been to have had access to ask questions to department directors who are the experts in the areas we're trying to make decisions, especially when they're coming to us for budgetary items and just understanding the function of the city. And from my perspective, the department directors are the experts in those fields. And obviously, I feel very strongly about the public elects the people sitting here, or the representation of the public, or the representation not only of the public to city staff and to the city administration, but we're also the representation of the city to the public. And so, no big surprise that I am a big advocate of communication and open communication and having access to that communication within boundaries and within guidelines. So my encouragement, I stated it in the email, but my encouragement again is going to be that, yes, clearly there needs to be some structure put into place. There's no question about that. There needs to be some structure on how city council members ask questions of the department directors, of city staff, how that communication happens. But my encouragement to city administration is have that communication, whether it be in a committee as we've done in previous ways, but work with city council to develop that structure on how best it can happen, how best this council can get answers to questions, and how best that would work moving forward with the department directors as well, because there clearly needs to be some structure in place. But my encouragement is for there to be discussion between city council and city administrators, however you want to make that happen, versus just kind of giving a directive to city council on how it will happen. But that's my encouragement, and I wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Discussion on that topic, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you give us some background on, is the staff getting too much information or too many requests? Is there kind of the staff saying, whoa, slow down? Can you give us a little history? Because
Unequivocally, yes. Is it uniform? Absolutely not. Is it all 11 of you? Absolutely not. But there's 25 of us between the 11 of you and all the department directors and Kevin and I. And so at our retreat, that was a request that they had of me. They said, Chris, we really appreciate the collaborative environment you and the administration, the council embraces. We really appreciate the accomplishments that we're having collectively. But you've got to do something to better manage the flow of information, because some directors are getting a dozen, 15, 20 questions a week. And those questions, without any structure around them, for some are the immediate, they drop what they're doing and they give you the answer to the question. Or if it goes to a further down staff member, that staff member stops what they're doing, gets you that answer to that question, and that's not a good management of people's time and resources. And so what they asked is, Chris, yes, let's structure something that tries to put some parameters, not limit, not prevent. Citizens are elected officials. You get to ask questions and seek to understand what we do in serving you. But they did absolutely ask that the administration find a way to be more of a gatekeeper, not keeping them away from and you away from them, but managing what sometimes might be dozens of questions in a relatively short period of time, and differentiating between the ones that truly are urgent and need to be answered right away because they pertain a policy issue to be answered for a decision on a Monday night, from those that I'm going to say are just, and I don't mean to say just, but they are, I'm curious about how this works. Well, we want to help you understand how this works, but there may not be an urgency to understanding how that works. That's okay if that waits until for 4 days to get you that response. When the other component, and this one's it's more complicated. When a citizen asks one of you, or asks, well, actually it is, when the citizen asks one of you a question, and then we end up in a big thread of emails where there's 3 people, 13 people, 23 people in a thread, and a bunch of staff, and public, and elected officials, actually there's some technical things we need to be sensitive to relative to decisions being made that way. And so part of what I have to prioritize, and I'll be first to be upfront about this, this is not the way I prefer to do business. I have to prioritize sitting at my computer, reviewing what you're sending in, to make sure that we are being responsive to it in a timely fashion versus just saying, okay, well, all the department heads will take care of those as those questions are coming in. And that was getting to the point where being a little unfair to them, that my responsibilities and Kevin's responsibilities were kind of being pushed off on them versus us saying, okay, how can we do a better job of filtering the questions and getting them off to the right person, and making sure that that person is giving us a response, not multiple people, and just efficiency of information. So the goal here is not to limit information. And I'm a firm believer that this is all relationship based. If you don't have trust and confidence in the department heads, if I'm a wall between you and them, then you can't build that trust and confidence in them. We're not going to go as far as we need to go. And yet I do have a responsibility to be a better, I think, manager of that information. That's what we're trying to do here. And it was flat, it was point blank to answer your question, a request that the department head said, Chris, get more engaged in helping us with this.
Okay, Councilor Purington?
So Chris, I guess my question is, in trying to keep those lines of communication open, and we get either someone, a citizen that asks us a question, and we forward it on to you. We have a question for staff on something that doesn't have something to do with the agenda per se. Then I'm seeing you and/or Kevin getting overloaded with these emails that we're not going to get an answer for several days because of whatever, the situation is. And so that's my concern. I liked the way that we were doing it, where we would ask a question to staff, CC to either you or Kevin, depending on, where it flowed, where they were on the flow chart. And if those types of questions are getting to be too many, then we still need to have some means of getting those answered in a timely manner. And I just feel like going through you two all the time is just going to be overload for you guys.
Yeah, I guess I have a similar concern, but Councilmember Brown?
Doggone it. Thank you, Mayor. I will tell you guys, in the 8 years I've been here, I've never reached out directly to a department head. I've always gone through the city administrator. Emails, typically they know are not an urgent, oh my God, I have to have an answer to him today. If I call, then generally it's somebody calling and climbing up my hiney. So now I need to figure out, what do I need to do? It's worked well with Chris. It worked well with Tina before that. The responses are quick. I don't wait days and days for a response. And it's just worked out really well. Now he gets me in touch with, or we set up a schedule to where I can get with the department heads. And mostly, I will be honest with you, that is when, how does this work? Okay, I'm getting frustrated and I just don't get it. So they clear me up and get me on the right path. But I think that works very well for me. I could totally understand having everyone just sending emails to everybody, that you're going to get overloaded. They have a lot of other duties that they've got to, deal with. So I get it. I too am with you. I was kind of shocked when I saw that. It's kind of, okay, here's the way it's going to be done. And I got to admit, it was kind of like, really? But I will tell you guys, it's worked out well for me, going straight through the city administrator. If it's urgent, tell them it's urgent.
So Chris, if I can just give you this example, when it comes to constituent inquiries, my pattern is to then get an inquiry, direct something to you, forwarding that to you, with a pretty detailed answer that kind of gives my understanding of what's going on, what the options are, CC the property owner so that they learn from that. Also CC the department heads so they can respond or as they want. They at least know what's going on. But then I'm done. I got one email, it goes out. My understanding from that memo, though, is there's two things I'm doing that are inaccurate or that I should not do in the future. One, I should not CC the department heads and rely on you to do that, which is okay. And then second, I should not CC the constituent, which means that they still are in the dark. So I need to send them I need to send you a detailed letter. I need to then send a second email to the constituent telling them that I've sent this the city administrator, but I think this is how it's going to shake out, blah, 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 blah. That puts a little more work on me. I can do that, but I just want to make sure, don't CC the department heads and definitely not sub-department people, and don't copy. I can communicate with the constituent, but don't do it as part of a broader communication. Am I understanding correctly?
I think you are understanding that it's helpful, because one of the things that happens is once staff starts responding to threads and multiple staff have different, and now you start getting conscientious about, are we having a dialogue and figuring this out? And when you're having a dialogue and figuring it out over emails with dozens of people involved, you start all of a sudden, oh, well, hold it. There's a lot more people on this thread. I need to be careful about the words. And it's not about that any of it's not transparent. All of it's public information. I mean, if anybody did a FOIA request on any of this, it all would be. But the goal is, as we work through this, that if we get the constituent question and there's clarity between the council member and the staff as to do you want to respond to the constituent or do you want us to respond to the constituent? If you want to be the one to do it, we're going to get the information back to you so you can share it. Or if you'd like us to go to the constituent and CC you on the answer, that's a clean way to do it. What we're trying to remove is when people start weighing in on feedback on it from threads across multiple departments and divisions. And it's going to create more work for me and Kevin and admin, and when that's in this loop too, deliberately, to help manage to get those to the right location and then get that response back to you in a timely fashion so you can either pass it on or if you want us to directly go right to that person.
Okay, Councilmember Denise, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to express my shock of reading the email as well, because it's really stated all communication was really, to me, it was a cutoff of communication from council. You were basically telling us we couldn't talk to staff. All communication means all communication. I appreciate Councilman Arani for looking at the charter a little bit more in detail and seeing how actually that memo is actually a violation of the charter. And so I think that's a concern, and I would hope you would send out another memo repealing this memo. But that said, I get emails all the time from clients, and I have to send off emails to my boss and about getting information and stuff like that. But it's up to me if I get an email from someone to determine if I'm going to include that client on the response or not. What my manager or what someone else does with that email after that is they have the same responsibility. If they need to go to another department to look at and get some information, they should look at who the CCs are on there and not include them if they need to include them. It's for us to be the firewall for your staff, then I think that's not appropriate. If we get a constituent asking us something, we're going to send it to you or the department head to say, hey, this they need some help. And then you guys can do with it what you need. I hope you would respond when you respond for the final answer to me as well, so that we can know what was done. So we don't get an email 2 months later saying, hey, I never heard from anyone, and I can actually search the email and say, oh no, you must have missed the email, here it is to you. And that's happened before. And so I don't think we should be the firewall for your staff. I've done that sometimes where I've actually done a double email, and I've stopped doing that because I feel like they are public servants. They can have, there's no private, it's not a private company. I'm not disclosing anything that's not public. And so they can go ahead and respond to that person directly or forward it to another department saying, no, I'm the wrong department. This is who you need to talk to. But that's what I have to say for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Boyette and Councilmember Joy.
I mean, I thought I was doing okay by not responding to the constituent right away and say, yes, I will look into it. I like the idea of me being able to go to Gina and say, and would copy you guys and say, this is what the constituent said. And that's all I'll wait for the response. I wonder if we're putting too much on you and Kevin and then you having to direct it. But I appreciate what you said, that the staff is getting too many responses from maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people, not all of us. If we end up going your way, maybe we could try that for 30 days or 60 days and see what happens. I don't want to shut us down, though, being able to talk to the staff and saying, this is what we heard. Can you help us out?
I'm sorry. Councilmember Joy, then Chris, you can comment as you like.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, and I appreciate Councilmember Brown's statement about how that has worked for him. It's worked very well for me to communicate with the city administrator. There have been situations where it involved code enforcement. It has involved constituents who didn't want their name and address. There are situations where there are people complaining about things that don't necessarily feel safe. And so I learned quickly not to include constituents in answers or anything like that, because some people don't feel safe talking about what's happening in their neighborhoods. So I think that's one way that I think we can be clear and provide good communication back to our constituents, and at the same time not put them in a bad position. And the mayor and I got on a thread with a constituent about a situation, and it just went really pear-shaped. By the end, I was like, oh my goodness, what has gone wrong here? So, yeah, threads. I'm not a big fan. That's all I can say. Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry, Chris and then Councilmember Ronnie.
So, this is challenging for me. I'll readily admit it's not my nature. My nature is, yeah, we're all going to collaborate and we're going to all know when we've asked too many questions or we've been out of line, and we're going to know when we're not. Candidly, I counted 13 question marks in an email last week. If that department had answered the 13 questions, that might have taken her 2.5 hours. None of those questions were essential to something that needed to be taken care of right then. So that openness has gone too far. Not too far to answering questions and getting answers to questions, but thinking that anytime I have something on my mind, I'm going to shoot an email to a department head, not recognizing that we're running a $400 million operation. And some of them have hundreds of employees that they're dealing with. So I think we've gotten a little out of context in that regard. My first statement probably was too strong. All communication needs to flow through the administrator. Now, some of my peers would say, Chris, that's not too strong at all. Read the charter. You want to do an investigation? Of course you can do an investigation, because I'm not to be a wall preventing you from checking up to make sure I'm doing a quality job. But the flow is supposed to be, you have one employee. And it's just a reality in human nature. Some of you can have a conversation with a department head and they can walk away from that conversation. They're 100% comfortable that was a conversation. Another person could have said all the same words and that was a directive from somebody to do something. And And so I'm just trying to get a better reposition this idea that I swung the doors wide open. I'm not suggesting you can't talk to department heads. I mean, you'll notice other than that first sentence, nowhere in there did he say you can't have a conversation with a staff member or department head. I rely on them then to say, and they do a pretty good job, that just the reality is that doesn't happen that much because it isn't practical that much anymore that you would all be having conversations with folks. Email has become the primary mode of communication. That's the primary thing that honestly we're trying to figure out how to get into a better position of managing the flow of information on. Hopefully to literally get you quicker answers, better, more thorough answers, as well as to your constituents, most efficiently using resources. You realize you tap into most directly the most expensive resources in this organization from me through the department heads. So that's what I'm trying to manage. That's what we're trying to manage better. And I'm gladly open to resets or dialogue about this in the upcoming months to get it to a right spot.
Councilor Ronning, we started with you, and we still have an executive session and public comment on non-agenda items, so if you can bring us to some sort of...
Yep. Thank you. I guess I would just go back to say, clearly we need to have a discussion on this with a committee, because I think that you've heard City Council express a clear question on how it was presented to us. We do only have one employee, that's true, but that employee just gave the City Council a directive. And that is really concerning to me. And I hope that that can be changed and there can be a communication flow that happens that I think is more appropriate and more fitting of the city charter. But also, I think that you have a council that clearly hears that the department directors, yes, they all have a job to do, but I also think that it is your job, Chris, if the city needs to grow in administrative type employees, then that needs to be really communicated to this council as well. We are a growing city. We are a growing budget. We do have now engagement that's happening with the public that is wanting to become more engaged. We just had that conversation about Zoom and technology and moving forward. So if that is something where there does need to be increased administrative employees, and we need to be thinking about that in the budget, my encouragement to you is to really let the future city council understand that, know that, and communicate that, because I think that that's understandable. But my encouragement again is to perhaps with either this council or the future council members is move away from the directive that you gave to city council from that weekly and start with communicating on really the structure that needs to be put in place. And clearly there does need to be a structure put in place, but my hope is that you can do it with council, with your boss, and come up with a solution that works for this table as well as for your employees. That's my encouragement.
Okay, I think that should wrap us up. Councilmember Neese, is it critical?
It is.
We've got to move.
It does have to do with the memo, and because it wasn't really mentioned and talked about, it has to do with the responses to the emails going into the weekly report. If you want to respond to all council members, just CC to all council. If just one council member asks you a question, but you think it's valuable for the whole council, then do all council. That way they can see it then, and it will go to the public. And so they can see, as people are watching the public emails to councils, they'll see that questions and they can answer it. We don't have to wait for a weekly report. Plus, when you do it in a weekly report like that, it's a one-way communication. You have to actually then go back to your other email, because you're not going to email it to us. We got to go back to those emails and then kind of pick up what we started and send it off again. And so it really stifles the communication between council and the issue. But if you want the council everyone to know about it, if you think it's good for all the council, just hit all council and let's have it and keep it out of the weeklies. I look for those weeklies to see what you're doing and what you are doing in the city, not so much what my peers are doing. I want to hear from you and how it's going on in the city. Thank you.
Okay, all righty, thank you very much. We'll then move on, council, to public comment on non-agenda items. If anybody would like to be heard on something not on our agenda, please come forward. And you know the routine. So, okay, I don't have to repeat it.
And yes, you do too. And what I'm going to say, no, you don't know. Catherine Card, 2815 4th Avenue South. Mayor and Council, the Road Dog Toy Run, as most of you probably know, was done this weekend, Sunday, and it was properly permitted this year. The participants were asked to not display signs of hatred, Confederate signs, or, as I understand, gang colors, gang patches. The weather, I think, seriously hampered the turnout and that kind of thing. But my sense is that the event was positive, or more positive this year. My sense was that it was better organized and a more loving event. There was a significant amount of discussion on Facebook about things pretty wide-ranging, but the discussion, and it got a little bit threatening at times, but it was a good discussion, I believe. So I just want to thank Chief St. John for ensuring that the event was properly permitted, and for his role and the police department in their accompaniment of that run. I also want to thank Mark Helmbrecht, who's the head of the Road Dogs, who was brave enough to say to people, put limits on people in terms of hate signs and that kind of thing, and put some boundaries. And I'm really appreciative for the progress. I hope that continues into the years to come. Thank you.
And thank you for telling us that, reporting back. Thank you. Any other public comment on non-agenda items? Any other public comment? Seeing none, that is closed. Council, we will now adjourn for our executive session.
Yes, and we can't find plasmadia.
I know, I think.
I was trying to see if there was some here.
St. Mary's University professor Linda Campbell